Chapter 385. Don't be impulsive. Even a prince has to be reasonable. Li Yi turned around, took the sword from Mississippi Lu's hand, put it back into the scabbard and said while shaking his head. Reasonable. Many people sighed in their hearts. They were now in the King of Shu's mansion. Li Xinzi was too naive to reason with the King of Shu and Madman Qin. Li Yi saw a certain emotion in the depths of second young Miss Lu's eyes and thought to himself that it was fortunate that he had detected it early. Otherwise, with second young Miss Lu's personality, if it weren't for him today, whatever little Duke Qin, the King of Shu, would have had his head kicked around like a ball. Just the guards that the King of Shu's household had displayed on the surface weren't even fit to carry the shoes of Li Xian's heir's household. It would be a wonder if they could withstand a furious second young Miss Lu. Of course he couldn't let Rui do that. After killing two bigwigs at once, it would be inconvenient for him to run away at night. Moreover, the King of Shu could be unreasonable to others, but he couldn't be unreasonable to him. At least not before the King of Shu became the emperor. Now he was no longer the man who was kidnapped by Mississippi Lu to the mountain without any human rights. Half a year's time was neither short nor long, but it was enough to change a lot of things. Sometimes even he felt surprised. When he looked back, he realized that he had gained a lot of things. At least he wouldn't be bullied at will anymore. Not by young Duke Qin, not by King of Shu. Li Yi put the sword back in Miss Lu's hand, turned around, looked at the King of Shu and said, "Everyone saw it clearly just now. It seems that the one who wanted to commit murder was little Duke Qin. We were just defending ourselves. I'm afraid this is not enough to assassinate him, right?" Everyone could only sigh at the naive Li Xianzi. What young Duke Qin wanted to do was one thing and what Li Xianzi wanted to do was another. How could they be the same? Young Duke Qin had the support of the King of Shu and a grandfather who was the prime minister. What about Li Xianzi? The King of Shu said lightly, "Qin, you was just saying. He didn't really chop off your hand. However, you injured him. Even if it's not an assassination, it's still a crime." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Your Highness means that if someone wants to assassinate your Highness, they must first chop off one of your Highness's hands before it can be considered an assassination?" The King of Shu opened his mouth, but he couldn't find any words to refute. Then he flew into a rage out of humiliation. "How dare you?" he said coldly. "Are you threatening I?" Li Yi was a little speechless. Didn't they agree to be reasonable? Who was threatening who now? Qin Yu's neck was only scratched a little and was no longer bleeding. He sneered and said, "Oh, you said that I wanted to commit murder first. Who saw it?" He turned around and pulled a random youth over, asking, "Did you see it?" No. The young man kept shaking his head, not daring to look Qin Yu in the eye. "Did you see that?" Qin Yu loosened his grip and pulled another one over. "No." "What about you?" No, I didn't see it either." Qin Yu pulled a few people in a row and everyone kept shaking their heads. How could they dare to go against young Duke Qin and the King of Shu? A bright smile appeared on his face and he said, "Look, they all said they didn't see it, but you actually framed me. It seems that I have offended them even more." The few people who were dragged over by him just now couldn't help but step back, causing the people behind them to move back as well. Seeing is believing. Crazy Qin was indeed worthy of his reputation. In front of so many people he inverted black and white, but no one dared to speak the truth. Naturally, they had to stay as far away from him as possible. Li Yi noticed that there was something wrong with Mississippi Lu's aura, which was extremely abnormal for a martial arts master like her. His eyelids twitched and he hurriedly grabbed her wrist and said, "Don't be impulsive. There are always people here who are not blind. They will give us justice." "Justice? You mean justice?" Qin Yu couldn't help laughing. Here there was actually someone talking about justice with him. "I saw it." As if to confirm what Li Yi had just said, a voice came from somewhere. It was like a ruthless slap on Qin Yu's face. Qin Yu's laughter became softer and softer. Finally it stopped and his face became calm. Those who knew him well knew that the smiling young Duke Qin was very scary. After laughing, the calmness of the young Duke Qin could no longer be described with the words scary. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu with a little pride and said, "See, I was right, wasn't I?" If he hadn't seen Li Xian just now, he might really have rushed out with Mississippi Lu. After all, he had been a county lieutenant for so long and he was very familiar with the law. No matter how powerful the King of Shu was, he didn't have the power to arrest people at will. Otherwise, it would be overstepping his authority, which was a big taboo. If he said he would assassinate, then he would do it. If he said he would do it, then he would do it. Did he think he was the emperor? Before becoming the crown prince and the emperor, the princes in the capital city had always been treated like pigs. So what if he was the king of Shu? Could he frame people at will? There were countless people in the capital city who were afraid of him, flattered him, and curried favor with him. But these people did not include Li Yi. Even if he became the emperor in the future, at worst he would not stay in the Jing kingdom anymore. At this time, everyone's attention was no longer on Li Yi. They were all looking for the source of the voice. They wanted to know who on earth was so bold that he didn't even give face to Madman Qin. Soon they found it. There seemed to be a figure standing behind the guards of the king of Shu's mansion who had surrounded the two people. Because they were standing in the light, it was difficult for them to see clearly in the dark. In addition, with the guards of the king of Shu's mansion blocking them, they could only vaguely see a vague shadow. They didn't know where the person came from and how long he had been standing there. But this was not important. What was important was what he had just done. "What are you?" The smile on Qin Yu's face disappeared, which meant that he was on the verge of exploding. The guards made way for him. With the help of the light, everyone saw the person, the appearance of those people. Standing in front was a young man. Even though the light wasn't too bright, it could still be seen that he was extremely handsome. Behind him stood several people who seemed to be his bodyguards. When they saw this scene, most people were stunned because they didn't know this young man. From the moment this young man appeared, the king of Shu's face was full of surprise. Cui Qingyu and Qin Lijun, who had been silent all this time, had a trace of doubt on their faces. But soon they understood and were somewhat surprised. They thought to themselves, "This is the king of Shu's mansion, why is he here? What are you?" The young man walked out of the darkness and walked to Qin Yu's side. As if to answer his question, he murmured, No, I'm not Dong." However, in the next moment he did something that shocked everyone to their core. When he walked in front of Qin Yu, the young man's face suddenly darkened. He kicked Qin Yu in the stomach and sent him flying. He said angrily, "I understand you are scolding me." Bang! The force of this kick was not light. After Qin Yu flew out, he hit the pillar hard. Those who were close to him even saw him spit out a mouthful of blood. The surrounding atmosphere suddenly quieted down. Countless people widened their eyes in shock and disbelief. The person who flew out just now was young Duke Qin? Did they see it wrong? Someone actually dared to treat him like this. Who was this strange young man? Everyone said that Qin Yu was a madman. This was the real madman. Li Yi was a little envious. Sometimes violence was the most suitable way to solve problems. The problem was, when could he be like this, no matter who the other party was, whether it was the king of Shu or the young duke, and fight without saying a word? "What are you doing?" Only then did the king of Shu recover from the shock. His face suddenly changed and he said angrily, "Li Xian, are you crazy?" Li Xian patted the hem of his robe, looked up at the king of Shu and said calmly, "Your Highness, he is scolding me." Scolding me means scolding you and insulting His Majesty. How can your Highness have such a friend? The king of Shu was stunned and then he felt very depressed. This was the second time he was speechless by someone. His father and Prince Ning were the legitimate children of the Empress Dowager, and their positions in the royal family were extremely important. Li Xian was the crown prince of Prince Ning and was valued by his father. With his status, Qin Yu should not have scolded him. However, was it reasonable for him to kick Qin Yu away? Just now, it seemed that in a situation that was even more severe than the one they were facing now, there was also someone who was smiling, and his smile was much more beautiful than young Duke Qin's. They looked at Li Xianzi and felt that everyone was acting strangely tonight. So it's, "Your Highness." Qin Yu coughed a few more times and coughed out some blood. His face was full of smiles, but it looked very strange. Li Xian looked very surprised. He walked in front of Qin Yu and said, "So it's young Duke Qin. I was really impolite just now. If I knew the person who scolded me was young Duke Qin, I would have used less strength." Qin Yu bowed slightly and said with a smile, "In that case, I have to thank your Highness." The crowd didn't understand what they were talking about. They really didn't understand these big shots. Obviously, they had been beaten to the point of vomiting blood, but they still had to thank the other side, while the other side accepted it calmly. What was wrong with this world? At this time, the development of the matter had completely exceeded their expectations. It didn't matter whether it was an assassination or a murder. It didn't matter whether Li Xianzi could leave the King of Shu's mansion safely. These things all became secondary because of young Duke Qin's kick. Now, apart from young Duke Qin and Prince Ning's heir Li Xian, the only one who could participate in this matter was King of Shu. In fact, King of Shu was also very troubled. Of course, it was impossible to catch Li Xian. If he detained Li Xian tonight because of this matter, he would become the laughingstock of the whole capital city tomorrow. No matter how much they didn't get along, Qin Yu was an outsider here after all. More importantly, he was in the wrong. But if he ignored it, how could he explain to Qin Yu? The Qin family and he had been in the same boat for a long time. How could he disappoint the Qin family? He knew better than anyone why Li Xian appeared here tonight and why he attacked Qin Yu. It turned out that he had underestimated Li Xianzi. His relationship with Li Xian was far more than ordinary friends. In this way, the reason why Qin Yu refused his invitation just now was probably because of Li Xian. Qin Yu made an unintentional mistake just now. He has received the punishment he deserves. This matter is over. King of Shu said with a sullen face. The county magistrate of Chong, and Li Yi, brought a female assassin into the king's mansion to assassinate young Duke Qin. He has evil intentions. He will be temporarily detained by the King of Shu's mansion and handed over to the Ministry of Justice tomorrow. If Li Xian hadn't appeared, he might not have made such a fuss. But his appearance made King of Shu make up his mind to directly determine this matter as an assassination. Since Li Xian made him uncomfortable, he naturally wouldn't let him feel comfortable. Li Yi's eyes flickered slightly. It would be strange if a person like King of Shu could become the emperor. He was so narrow-minded. It was him who invited him here. Just now he said that he would have a bright future if he followed him. Now he turned his back on him. The old emperor must be blind to pass the throne to him. If King of Shu could bear it at this time, he would really be careful. But in order to punish him, King of Shu was so eager, so the danger was naturally much less. Assassinate Qin Yu? Temporarily detain the King of Shu's mansion? A smile appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at King of Shu and asked, Your Highness, who gave you this power? His Majesty or yourself? As soon as Li Xian said this, King of Shu's face immediately changed and became completely gloomy. The hearts of the people around also trembled. His Highness had completely fallen out with King of Shu. Just because of Li Xianzi? Was it worth it? Although King of Shu was a prince, he could do whatever he wanted in his own fief, which was far away from the emperor. But this was the capital city. Strictly speaking, King of Shu, who was already an adult, should have gone back to his fief long ago. In the capital city, although everyone had to salute him and call him Your Highness, in fact he could only use this title. He had no real power because he was not the crown prince, let alone the emperor. Of course, because King of Shu had a strong background and was very likely to ascend the throne, no one in the capital city dared to talk to him like this. They could not wait to flatter him. Even if he was fine and overstepped his power, no one would care. But if this matter was brought to the table, King of Shu would not be in the right even if it was brought to His Majesty. Because the person who said that was Crown Prince Li Xian, the supervisor of Jiangxi province, the supervisor of King of Shu. Moreover, even a blind man could tell what was going on tonight. If the Crown Prince, as the supervisor, intervened, the King of Shu and Little Duke Qin would no longer be in the hands of the King of Shu and Little Duke Qin. The reputation that the King of Shu had accumulated over a long period of time would also be smeared with a big stain. After Crown Prince tore off this fig leaf, King of Shu had been forced into a desperate situation. Chapter 387. Who gave you this authority? Was it His Majesty or yourself? The King of Shu realized sadly that he was speechless at Li Xian's words. His father had never said such a thing. As for himself, of course he was not qualified to do so. Li Xian's words struck the King of Shu's heart. No matter how the King of Shu answered, he would be in the wrong. Li Xian's words even tore off the King of Shu's mask, making him feel as though he was exposed in front of everyone. He was a prince, yes, but this was the capital. It was precisely because he was a prince, an adult prince, that he could not do as he pleased. It was just that no one had pointed this out. No one was willing to offend him. Everyone he came into contact with was flattering him and bootlicking him. However, no one was willing to offend him, but it did not mean that no one was willing to offend him. The King of Shu's face was indescribably gloomy. He could no longer maintain his deliberate calmness. He and Li Xian did not see eye to eye. This had been a fact since they were young. However, it was the first time they had completely fallen out like this. He chose to completely fall out with her for someone who wasn't that important to him. The king of Shu was angry, surprised and puzzled. He did not understand. Did Li Xian really not care at all? Did he not care about the fact that he would become the emperor in the future? The king of Shu did not know that if Li Xian knew of his thoughts, he would probably be met with another wave of mockery. He would not care so much. He only knew that when the king of Shu really ascended to the throne, he would no longer have such a chance. The atmosphere in the hall was strange to the point of freezing. Everyone, including Cui Qinyu, Qin Lijun and even Qin Yu and Madman Qin, were silent. Most people did not even dare to breathe loudly. Now that things had developed to this point, it was no longer something they could intervene in. If your highness has nothing else, we will leave first. The first to break the silence was Li Xian. He first smiled at the king of Shu, then turned his head, put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder and walked out. The king of Shu did not say a word and Qin Yu was expressionless. The guards of the king of Shu's residence did not stop them and consciously made way for them. How did this happen? Li Xian let go of Li Yi's shoulder and asked in astonishment before they walked out of the king of Shu's mansion. Before Li Yi could answer, he seemed to have thought of something and a look of understanding appeared on his face. He glanced at Mississippi Lu and said, "I know, so it's because of that lunatic Qin Yu. But doesn't he always like married women? How could he?" Li Yi found it hard to associate this chatterbox beside him with the domineering crown prince just now. He shook his head and asked, "Why are you here?" "I'm here to see if you will stir up any trouble in the king of Shu's residence." Li Xian looked as if he had great foresight and said, "If I had come a little later, you wouldn't have killed the king of Shu and Madman Qin, right?" "I didn't want to kill the king of Shu," Mississippi Lu said lightly. For some reason, Li Xian only felt as if a cold wind was blowing around him. He didn't want to kill the king of Shu. He had to thank Madman Qin because he saved his life. "The king of Shu recruited you?" Li Xian suddenly asked. Li Yi nodded. "You didn't agree?" Li Xian asked again. Li Yi glanced at him. Wasn't it obvious? If he had agreed to the king of Shu, what happened just now would not have happened. Li Xian felt inexplicably happy. He had a lot of happy things these 2 days. He asked casually, "Why? Don't you know that he is the prince most likely to inherit the throne? Then why did you still fall out with him?" Li Yi asked back. "Because I don't like him," Li Xian said matter-of-factly. "I don't like him either." "Why?" "Because he is ugly." When sitting in the carriage on the way back to the crown prince's residence, Li Xian was still thinking about the question just now. "The king of Shu is not ugly," he said to himself. Then he nodded and said, "Of course he is far inferior to me. Compared to that guy, he is also a little inferior." A mysterious smile appeared on his face. Then he opened the curtain and said, "Lu Liang, hurry up, what are you waiting for?" The guard driving the carriage smiled bitterly. "Your Highness, this is already fast enough. We can reach the crown prince's residence in 15 minutes at most." His Highness had been acting strangely these 2 days. In the past, when he returned to the residence, he would delay as long as he could. Now he wished he could grow a pair of wings and fly back. The king of Shu's residence was not far from the city gate. When Li Yi arrived, there were many carriages coming in and out. There was a long queue of carriages entering the city. He asked the carriage to stop outside the city. The crown prince's residence was in a different direction. After rejecting Li Xian's offer to send them, he naturally had to walk over with Mississippi Lu. He was limping and the way he walked was a little strange. He did not feel anything when he was in the king of Shu's residence, but now it had somehow gotten worse. He thought that he would let Rui massage it when he returned. It should be fine the next morning and he would not delay his trip to the palace. "Take it." Mississippi Lu stopped, turned around and suddenly threw the sword in her hand to him. Li Yi caught it and asked, "What is it?" Mississippi Lu squatted down slightly and said, "Come on up." "It's okay. I can walk on my own." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Dawdle." She seemed to be a little impatient and walked straight over. "Don't be so wishy-washy. The city gate is about to close." Li Yi held the sword called Autumn Water in his hand. A faint fragrance lingered in his nose. He thought to himself that there would be a day when he would be carried by a woman. Moreover, it was Mississippi Lu. Thinking back to half a year ago, she was still riding on a horse with a proud expression. Now it was really like a dream. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Two voices rang out at the same time. Mississippi Lou stopped for a moment and then continued to move forward. There was a long silence again and the atmosphere was a little awkward. You first. You first. The atmosphere was awkward for a while. I'm sorry to have made you suffer tonight. Li Yi said apologetically. She was Lu Rui. There was only one Lu Rui in the world, the heroine Lu Rui, who was quick to repay kindness and revenge. Rui had doted on her since she was a child and refused to let her suffer the slightest grievance. This was also the main reason why she had such a character. Who was the king of Shu? Who was the young Duke Qin? There should be nothing in the world and no one could make her feel wronged, including himself. However, it was because of him that she had to be restrained by many things. There's nothing to be sorry about. I shouldn't have been so impulsive. After all, this is the capital. Mississippi Lou said after a moment of silence. You have nothing to be sorry about. Because I was going to do the same. We can't just obediently stretch out our hands when others want to cut off our hands, right? And then, let's kill our way out. They can't stop us. They can't stop me. What's yours and mine is the same. What's divine punishment? You've seen it that night in Willow Village. How did you do it? Do you want to learn it? Yes. You should have told me earlier. How would I know if you didn't tell me? If you had asked earlier, I would have taught you. There's no need to be polite between us. Do you really want to learn it? Plop. Li got up from the ground. Looking at Lu Rui's back, he limped and chased after her. Don't go. Don't you want to learn it? How can I teach you if you leave? The king of Shu's mansion. After what happened just now, the banquet couldn't continue tonight. The king of Shu had completely lost face in front of everyone. His face was extremely gloomy. The rest of the people didn't say a word and didn't even dare to breathe heavily. It was not until now that the king of Shu realized that he hadn't paid enough attention to Li Xianzi from the beginning to the end. Li Xian's falling out with him made him deeply aware of this fact. He just didn't know what kind of position Li Xianzi had in his father's heart. But no matter what, his actions tonight had completely pushed Li Xianzi to the opposite side. Because of this, Qin Yu would definitely hold a grudge against him. The king of Shu hadn't done something like this for a long time. Standing behind him, Qin Lijun and Cui Qingyu still had shock and astonishment on their faces. For them, this was a trivial matter that Qin Yu could solve alone. Who would have thought that the situation would suddenly take a turn for the worse and even the king of Shu would be involved? The result of this matter was far beyond their expectations. As the supervisor, Crown Prince Li Xian had actually fallen out with the king of Shu in front of so many people. From their point of view, this matter was simply incomprehensible. I'll go back first. Qin Yu's expression was calm. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. After saying that, he left with his men. This strange silence didn't last long. Everyone scrambled to take their leave. Naturally, they didn't dare to mention what had just happened. The king of Shu and Qin Yu looked very calm on the surface. But those with discerning eyes knew that after tonight, there would probably be a big storm in the capital city. The focus of the storm was, of course, Li Xianzi, who had just shown his outstanding talent. It was just unknown whether the crown prince could continue to protect him under the wrath of the king of Shu and little Duke Qin. Late at night, the entire capital city was gradually shrouded in darkness and silence. Most of the lights in the imperial city were extinguished. Only rows of patrolling guards with lanterns occasionally passed by. At this time, in the depths of the palace, there were still lights swaying in a palace, and the sound of pages turning could be heard from time to time. A ghostly figure suddenly appeared outside the hall of diligent government. Chief Chamberlain Changde glanced at the eunuchs who had begun to doze off outside the hall. He coughed lightly and the two immediately woke up. Seeing the figure standing in front of them, their faces immediately turned pale. Just as they were about to salute, Changde waved his hand, gently pushed open the hall door and floated in. Inside the hall of diligent government, Emperor Jing was reviewing memorials at the innermost table. Hearing the sound coming from inside the hall, Emperor Jing looked up and casually asked, "What time is it now?" "Your Majesty, it's just past midnight. It's so late." Although Emperor Jing said so, he covered his mouth and coughed a few times. Then he continued to review. Changde hesitated for a moment and said, "Your Majesty, it's getting late. Li Xianzi once said that Your Majesty shouldn't be too tired. For the sake of the world, Your Majesty, please go to bed early." It's been so many years. 1 or 2 more days won't make a difference, Emperor Jing said indifferently. A wry smile appeared on Changda's face. His Majesty had said this for several years, but every time he just said it casually. Speaking of Li Xianzi. Emperor Jing put down his pen, rubbed his wrist and said, "Did he attend the banquet invited by the King of Shu tonight?" Changda nodded and said, "About the banquet invited by the King of Shu today, I have something to report to your Majesty." "Tell me, what kind of trouble did my county magistrate Li cause?" Jing Emperor smiled, got up and stretched, walked down and said, "Your Majesty is wise." Changda was stunned for a moment and then said with great admiration. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "What wise? He and Xian are good friends. Li Xian wanted to win him over, but he chose the wrong person. One is arrogant and the other is stingy. If they didn't cause any trouble, I would be surprised." Hearing this, Changda smiled and stopped thinking about it. He told Emperor Jing everything that happened in the mansion of the King of Shu tonight. If the King of Shu or Li Yi were present, they would probably be shocked by Changda's words. This was because his description of tonight's events was extremely detailed. It was as though he was personally present at the scene. Even the details that Li Yi and the King of Shu did not notice were not left out by him. Xian was there. Emperor Jing habitually touched the short beard on his chin and asked, "Did Li Xianzi do anything before Xian went to the mansion of the King of Shu?" Changda shook his head and said, "According to the spy, Li Xianzi should be afraid of the Qin family and the King of Shu, so he didn't do anything special tonight. Qin Yu wanted to cut off Li Xianzi's hand, but Li Xianzi didn't do anything. But the second Miss Lu almost cut Qin Yu with a sword. When the King of Shu wanted to arrest them, Li Xianzi happened to arrive." "Afraid of the Qin family and the King of Shu?" Emperor Jing shook his head and said, "I'm afraid that only those who died in the Willow Leaf village know that the Qin family and the King of Shu are not enough to make him afraid. He didn't do anything, but he was waiting for me to do something." Changda's face showed a trace of doubt. Although he had been with His Majesty for decades, he still couldn't guess some of the Emperor's thoughts. "Forget it. He is so generous to me, so I can't be stingy to him. It's good to let him make a mess in this lifeless capital city." Emperor Jing stood in front of the palace door with his hands clasped behind his back. Looking at the stars in the sky, he showed a smile that even Changda couldn't understand. Chapter 388. With such a son, why should the Qin family worry about not perishing? Emperor Jing did not continue to read the memorials. After writing a few edicts, he went to the Empress' bedroom to rest. Changda stood at the door of the Hall of Diligent Government, playing with a token in his hand. Thinking of the contents of the edicts, a rare sneer appeared on his old face. The great victory in the battle with the Qi kingdom and the capture of the city was a great achievement that the former emperor and even Emperor Taizu had not completed. Now the emperor's prestige among the officials had reached its peak. Recently, the various edicts issued and the voices of opposition in the court had almost disappeared. Make a fuss. It's a pool of stagnant water, but there are many undercurrents. However, it's good to make a fuss. After a moment, he put away the wooden token in his hand and murmured. His figure quickly disappeared into the dark palace. When he woke up, Li Yi could hardly feel the pain in his ankle. He also had a stream of jinqi that second granduncle had poured into his body. Although it was almost useless against masters, his body was indeed much better than before. Besides the jinqi massage from Rui, it was also related to his gradually improving self-healing ability that he could jump up and down so quickly. As usual, he had to go to the palace to teach. Now that the time of the prince and princess's mathematics class was arranged by him, he naturally did not need to get up so early. When he went out, Rui helped him tidy up his collar and warned him, "My husband, you have to be careful these 2 days. Don't walk or run. Although you didn't hurt your muscles or bones, you still need 2 days to recover." While no one was paying attention, Li Yi secretly kissed her on the cheek and said, "I know." Rui was thin-skinned and blushed, but she did not avoid it. Behind Li Yi, the little servant girl made an ah sound. She was about to come in, but she covered her face and ran out. Mississippi Lu was already waiting for him in the carriage outside. When Li Yi walked out and was about to get on the carriage, several figures came from not far away. Seeing the people walking over, Li Yi's expression froze for a moment. Then a hint of joy appeared on his face as he said, "Why are you here?" Lu Yichang, who was dressed in a yamen uniform, was also pleasantly surprised. He walked over and said somewhat bewilderedly, "Sir, it's really you. When did you come to the capital?" Li Yi looked at him and asked with a smile. When he was in Qing and Fu, it was because of Lu Yi that he could be at ease as a lazy county magistrate. This guy was born to be a bailiff. Even Li Yi had no choice but to accept his abilities. "Just arrived 2 days ago." Lu Yi smiled and said, "Sir Lu has been transferred to Jingdo and has brought me with him. I originally wanted to pay a visit to you, but I didn't expect to see you so soon." County Magistrate Lu has been transferred to the capital. Li Yi was a bit surprised to hear this. Although Qing and Fu was also an important town in the Jing kingdom, it was still inferior to Jingdo. Under normal circumstances, being transferred from Qing and Fu to the center of power in the Jing kingdom was a promotion. Even County Magistrate Lu would be transferred to Jingdo one day. This time, without waiting for Lu Yichang to reply, a middle-aged man dressed in a scarlet official's uniform came forward and said with a smile, "Greetings, County Magistrate Li." He didn't introduce his official position because it wasn't the first time the two had met. When Li Yi went to deal with the matter of the crazy monk, he saw him at the yamen. At that time, this person stood beside the magistrate and seemed to be a county magistrate. "What business does County Magistrate's son have here?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. The middle-aged man laughed and said, "Marquis Qin's Fu sent someone to the yamen this morning to report that young Duke Qin was injured by an assassin yesterday. I was ordered to come here to investigate." County Magistrate Chen had a smile on his face, but he was secretly bitter in his heart. It wasn't good to let him, a county magistrate, deal with the matter of Prime Minister Qin's Fu and Viscount's Fu. No matter which side he offended, it wouldn't be good. However, it was very clear that offending County Magistrate Li was much wiser than offending Prime Minister Qin. Li Yi thought that crazy Qin moved fast. An official came early in the morning. He wasn't even willing to wait for half a day. The king of Shu didn't have the power to detain people, but the yamen of Jingdo had the power. Moreover, this county magistrate's attitude was very good and friendly. He looked like he was doing things according to the law, but he still maintained etiquette. People who could get to this position were indeed not ordinary people. Hearing this, Mississippi Lu jumped down from the carriage and stood beside Li Yi. Lu Yichang opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. This was his first time handling a case, but he didn't expect to find County Magistrate Li Lord Li. There was no doubt that without Lord Li there would be no Lu Yichang today. However, today it was the county magistrate who was in charge, so he couldn't get a word in. At this time he was in a bit of a dilemma. County Magistrate's son smiled and said, "County Magistrate Li and the girl only need to go to the county government with me. The right and wrong will be decided by themselves. I will also act according to the law. I hope County Magistrate Li won't be embarrassed." County Magistrate's son's duty was to take them back. As for what would happen later, it was County Magistrate Lu's headache. The people of Marquis Qin's Fu were waiting in the county government. This first case was probably enough to make County Magistrate Lu, who suddenly appeared out of nowhere, suffer a lot. Li Yi smiled and said, "Sorry, I have to go to the palace now. I'm afraid I can't go back with County Magistrate Sunday. You go back first. After I come out of the palace, I will go directly to the county government." There was a prime minister in Qin's mansion. If he went to the county government, they could do whatever they wanted. He was not so stupid. What's more, the thing he was waiting for hadn't come yet. Although he didn't know whether it would come or not, he had different preparations. But he didn't prepare to go to the county government with County Magistrate Sunday. County Magistrate's son was in a bit of a dilemma because he didn't know why County Magistrate Li went to the palace. However, he couldn't afford to delay anything in the palace. But if he didn't take the girl back, how could he explain to the people of Qin's mansion? County Magistrate Li this. When County Magistrate's son was hesitating, a sound of hooves came from the front, which interrupted the struggle in his mind. A gorgeous carriage stopped in front of the Viscount's mansion, and there were several people riding on horses in front. The leader was an old man with wrinkles all over his face. Several people behind him were also wearing brocade robes. They looked middle-aged with fair faces and no beard. County Magistrate's son could tell at a glance that they should be the servants of the palace. Li also saw it. He saw what he was waiting for, or rather, the person. The leading old man got off the horse and walked to Li Yi. He said expressionlessly, According to His Majesty's order, I'm here to take County Magistrate Li to the palace. County Magistrate Sun's eyelids twitched. According to His Majesty's order? His Majesty sent a servant to take him to the palace. It seemed that today's matter was destined to not go smoothly. The man was an old acquaintance. Li Yi walked over and looked at Changde. He said, Supervisor Chang, why does His Majesty want to see me? County Magistrate Sun's eyelids twitched again. Why does His Majesty want to see you? Is this something you should ask? He began to be confused about County Magistrate Li's position in His Majesty's heart. He couldn't offend Qin's mansion, but could he offend His Majesty? Changde still said expressionlessly, You'll know when you get there. After that he took out a plate from his pocket and threw it to Li Yi. He said, Put this away and get in the carriage. Looking at the plate in his hand, Li Yi asked in confusion, What's this? There were many rules and plates in the capital. Viscounts had plates that represented their identities. Entering the palace had plates that allowed people to enter the palace. Everything had to be done with plates. It seemed that it was very popular to give plates to the emperor and monks. The problem was that he didn't know what these plates were for. Although Li Yi didn't know the plate in his hand, it didn't mean that County Magistrate Sun didn't know it. In fact, even if the County Magistrate didn't know it, it was impossible for him not to know it. Seeing this plate, he felt his legs go weak and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. Was Qin's mansion crazy? How could they send him to arrest County Magistrate Li? With this plate, except for His Majesty who had the power to arrest him. This was the plate of the Secret Intelligence Office. The Secret Intelligence Office was a special department directly under His Majesty and only answered to His Majesty. It had always been them who arrested people. How could others arrest them? It was fine if they were targeted by the censors. At most they would argue with them. But if they were targeted by the Secret Intelligence Office, they would have no way out. Thinking of these things, County Magistrate Sun felt his legs go even weaker. Took him a lot of effort to steady himself. He had already cursed the steward of Qin's mansion in his heart. Changde said lightly, This is the plate of the Secret Intelligence Office. From today on, you only need to listen to His Majesty's orders. Apart from that, you don't need to care about anything else. Hearing this, Li Yi's eyes lit up. He suddenly felt that the simple and unadorned plate in his hand had become dazzling. Only need to listen to the old emperor's orders. Didn't that mean that with this plate he could do whatever he wanted in the capital? Good stuff, good stuff. Seeing that Li Yi was still standing there, Changde urged, Let's go. Li Yi nodded. Just as he was about to get into the more luxurious carriage, he suddenly seemed to remember something. He turned back, looked at County Magistrate Sun and asked, County Magistrate Sun, what did you want to say just now? I wanted to say. County Magistrate Sun's forehead was already covered with a thin layer of sweat, but he didn't even dare to wipe it. With a straight face he said, I wanted to say that the monks that County Magistrate Li asked us to track last time have been found. They are all monks from the Qi Kingdom. Although they have already escaped the capital, the Ministry of Justice has already issued an arrest warrant. County Magistrate Li, please rest assured. As soon as there is news of them, I will immediately send someone to inform you. Then I'll have to trouble you, County Magistrate Sunday. Li Yi gave him a meaningful smile and got into the carriage from the palace with Mississippi Lu. Seeing the carriage go far away and the eunuchs on horseback also disappear before his eyes, County Magistrate Sun let out a long sigh of relief. His heart finally relaxed. Go back, he said angrily. Damn steward of Qin's mansion. Why didn't he tell me that County Magistrate Li was from the intelligence office? Didn't he send me to die? A bailiff asked in confusion, Your Excellency, aren't we here to catch the assassins? Where are the assassins? County Magistrate Sun was angry when he didn't say it. He immediately turned around and gave the bailiff a hard kick on his butt. Catch the assassins? Catch your mother. The bailiff didn't dare to dodge. He said pitifully, Your Excellency, my mother passed away 2 years ago. How dare you talk back? Seeing this scene, a smile appeared on Lu Yi's face. No matter where he was, the county magistrate was still the former county magistrate. The carriage stopped in front of the palace gate. Li Yi turned to Mississippi Lu and said, I don't know when I can come out. Go take a walk on the street and wait for me here in 4 hours. Changde reminded him, The token that His Majesty gave you to enter the palace allows you to bring 2 people with you. Li Yi was stunned. He looked at the old eunuch and said, "Why didn't you say so earlier?" He looked back at Mississippi Lu and said, "Then let's go to the palace together. I can show you what the palace looks like." Changde said expressionlessly, "She can only accompany you in. She can't wander around and you can't either." "You talk too much." Li Yi thought to himself, this old eunuch doesn't usually talk so much. Why didn't he stop talking today? Mississippi Lu still carried her sword with her, but even the general had to take off his armor when entering the palace. She could only leave her sword at the palace gate. Before Li Yi went to Bowen Hall, he had to see the old emperor first. Changde led the way while he and Mississippi Lu walked behind. Speaking of which, half of the experts in the world are in the palace. In the palace, any old eunuch you meet could be a peerless expert. Don't run around later. Li Yi reminded Mississippi Lu. This time Rui didn't refute Li Yi. She had never been to the palace before and never thought that she would have the chance to come here. She looked at the palace walls on both sides and the palace in the distance with interest. For example, Steward Chong. Although he doesn't know the Sunflower Manual, he's definitely very good at martial arts. It's just that he's a little old. If he's willing, you can find him later to exchange a few moves. But remember to go easy on him. After all, the old man's body is weak. Li Yi knew that Mississippi Lu was a battle maniac, but in reality, it was rare to find someone who was on par with her. He was too weak and Rui was too strong. Neither of them were suitable opponents. There must be a lot of experts in the palace. It should be enough for her to have a few good fights. No. Mississippi Lu didn't even look at the old man and said straightforwardly, "Why?" Li Yi was a little confused. He had seen Changde's skills. He should be quite good. Could it be that Mississippi Lu didn't want to bully the old man? "I can't beat him." Mississippi Lu's answer was also very straightforward. This time Li Yi was really surprised. To be able to make the proud Mississippi Lu admit that she was inferior to him, this old eunuch seemed to be much stronger than he had imagined. He looked up at Changde. No wonder he was the steward of the inner attendants. He was always by the old emperor's side. The old man was still as strong as before. "My body is weak?" Hearing Li Yi's words, the old man who was walking in front curled his lips. In his opinion, Li Yi's martial arts were not worth mentioning at all. On the other hand, the little girl beside him was really talented. At such a young age, she had already reached such a high realm. He had seen too many talented people in his life, but only Her Royal Highness could be mentioned in the same breath as her. In Li Yi's opinion, Mississippi Lu was already an expert of experts that he would never be able to surpass in his lifetime. He didn't expect this old eunuch to be even more powerful. It seemed that since ancient times, the saying that experts came out of the palace was not wrong at all. The fire of gossip began to burn in his heart. Just as he was about to ask Steward Chong if he knew the Sunflower Manual, he suddenly felt something and looked up at a palace in front of him. At a glance, he saw that there were dozens of figures slowly walking out of the palace that was more than twice the size of the palaces around it. Without exception, they were all related to the officials of Prime Minister Qin's faction. When these matters were put together, the meaning behind it was very thought-provoking. Was His Majesty finally going to make a move against the group of civil officials led by Prime Minister Qin? For many years, many of His Majesty's decrees had been strongly opposed by these conservative factions. For the stability of the court, His Majesty would often choose to give in. Could it be that this time His Majesty wanted to take advantage of the peak of the court's prestige to settle old scores with them? Most of the people in the imperial court could not participate in these matters, and they did not dare to continue guessing. It was better to let Prime Minister Qin and the others have a headache. As for whether the King of Shu could become the crown prince, although this matter was closely related to them, at least for now, at least it was not very important. The ancestral rules could not be violated. Even if His Majesty did not think highly of the King of Shu, 2 of the Empress's sons died prematurely in her early years. It was not until Princess Yongle was born that the imperial physician in the palace concluded that the Empress would never be able to conceive another child in this lifetime. Therefore, it was justifiable for the prince born by concubine Cui to become the crown prince. Moreover, countless officials in the imperial court, including Prime Minister Qin, supported the King of Shu's ascension to the throne. Under the circumstances of righteousness, Even His Majesty could not violate the ancestral rules and the wishes of so many officials at the same time. Without any preparation, such a big shock suddenly occurred in the imperial court. Compared to this, other matters were naturally not so important. For example, yesterday, they learned from the juniors in their families that the King of Shu's invitation last night ended in discord. The Crown Prince of Ning, Li Xian, and the King of Shu had a falling out. The little Duke of Prime Minister Qin's family seemed to have encountered an assassin. These were all jokes between the juniors. No one would connect these two matters. His Majesty's small purge of Prime Minister Qin's family did not affect them. At the moment, the most important matter was another matter. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom had arrived in the capital. He requested to see His Majesty twice in a row, but was rejected by His Majesty. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom was waiting at the office of the Herald of Honor. His Majesty was preparing to hold another banquet in the palace to celebrate General Su Dingyuan's victorious return. All the civil and military officials in the imperial court and all the nobles in the capital had to attend. This was like stabbing another knife in the chest of the envoy of the Qi Kingdom. Without a doubt, the envoy was sent immediately after the war ended. What a joke. He was able to fool an eminent monk like Master Tan Yin and the monks of the Qi Kingdom. It had always been the monks who fooled others. Would the old emperor be more difficult to deal with than them? Since father had already agreed, Mingzu naturally had nothing to say. She shook her head helplessly and said, "I don't know if father has told you that the palace ban will be lifted tonight. There will be a banquet at Yonghe Palace for the officials. At the same time, it will be held to welcome General Su. As the county magistrate, you will also have to attend." Really? Li looked surprised. No one had told him about what Mingzu said just now. Chapter 390. If Li Yi's memory served him right, it had only been a few days since the old emperor held a banquet for the officials in the palace. The banquet for civil and military officials was naturally of a high standard. The King of Shu, who was petty and narrow-minded, could not be compared with it. No matter how rich the national treasury was, it would not be so wasteful. Even if it was to slap the faces of the ambassadors of the Qi Kingdom and stab them in the chest, couldn't it be done in a simpler and more violent way? For example, throw a few heavenly punishment at the place where they lived? The cost of such a banquet was much lower than that of a banquet. It was totally worth considering. "Can I not go?" Li looked at Mingzu and asked. He had caused a lot of trouble when he attended the banquet of the King of Shu yesterday. If he messed up the banquet of the old emperor, he would have nowhere to run in the heavily guarded palace. "Of course you can, but you have to tell my father yourself." Mingzu glanced at him and said. Li thought to himself that it was better to forget it. As the saying went, being in the king's company was like being with a tiger. Although this tiger was quite docile when he saw it, who knew when it would show its fangs? A tiger was a tiger after all. It was okay to look at it through the fence in the zoo. Only a fool would jump into the tiger mountain to look at it twice a day. Anyway, the main purpose of this visit had been achieved. It was time to discuss with Rui about going on a honeymoon. As for what would happen in the capital, whether the King of Shu would become the crown prince or not, and what conditions the ambassadors of the Qi Kingdom would put forward, who cared? What, an invitation from the Empress? Li looked at the invitation in Rui's hand and was a little surprised. The old emperor was holding a party in Yonghe Palace and the officials were invited. The Empress was also holding a banquet in Phoenix Cry Hall. Of course, the guests were all the ladies of the capital and the wives of the officials. Normally, a county magistrate's wife was not qualified to attend, but Rui was also invited. At this time, she was holding the invitation and asking for Li Yi's opinion. "Since it's the Empress' invitation, I'd better go." Li thought it would be good for Rui to visit the palace. After all, there were not many opportunities like this. Moreover, this was the first time the Empress had invited him. As the tigress with the highest status in the Jing Kingdom, it would not be good to reject her. Li didn't care about the banquet. He put it aside for the time being and whispered to Rui, "How's the preparation for that matter?" Rui was startled, then realized what he was talking about. She said in a low voice, "We are leaving, but we don't tell Rui and Xiao Huan. This is not good. We're only going out for a while. It's not like we're not coming back." After leaving the court, many officials did not even return to their own homes. About an hour after Prime Minister Qin returned to the mansion, They secretly changed into plain clothes and paid a visit. However, these people, including Prime Minister Qin's students, were all stopped outside by the gatekeeper. The reason was that Prime Minister Qin was not feeling well and they could talk about anything in a few days. Everyone returned in disappointment. Those in the Qin's mansion who knew the inside story were also worried. Father, what does His Majesty mean? Why was eldest brother suddenly transferred from the secretariat? There are several other edicts. They are simply aimed at Father and the Qin family. Those officials are waiting outside. Father, do you want to meet them? Everyone came forward to ask. The old man sitting on the chair frowned and said, "There is no need to talk about this. How can we talk about His Majesty's thoughts? I am loyal to His Majesty and the Jing Kingdom. The sun, the moon, and the heaven and earth can prove it. Things are not what you think." Prime Minister Qin took a sip of tea. After he calmed down, he frowned slightly again. His Majesty's action this morning was beyond his expectation. Although it was a spring breeze and rain, there was a thunder hidden in the dark. He did not think that he had done anything wrong to His Majesty. Everything he did was for the sake of the Jing Kingdom and the people. Why did His Majesty do this? Was it because of the King of Shu? No matter from which point of view, the King of Shu was the only candidate to inherit the throne. Even His Majesty could not change this. Otherwise, there would be great turmoil in the court. He believed that His Majesty himself did not want to see such a scene. He looked up and saw a person in the hall with a white cloth wrapped around his neck. He frowned again and looked at the young man and asked, "What's going on?" "It's a small matter." Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth and said indifferently, "These days you'd better be more stable. Don't go to the King of Shu so often." Although he was extremely disappointed with this grandson, he was the only direct descendant after all. So Prime Minister Qin could not help but exhort him. Qin Yu did not answer. The expression on his face did not change at all. It was unknown whether he had heard it or not. Prime Minister Qin looked a little thoughtful and said, "His Majesty is holding a banquet in the palace tonight. You and I will go together." Tonight's banquet was not limited to the officials. For people like them, it was normal to bring a member of the younger generation to show his face in front of everyone. Chapter 391. Tonight the Imperial Palace was very lively. For the first time the ban was lifted, which meant that the banquet could go on very late. Yonghe Palace and Fengming Hall were actually two adjacent palaces, but they were separated from each other, so the situation on the other side could not be seen. Li Yi and Rui were led by two eunuchs from the palace gate. They had never seen the Imperial Palace so lively. From time to time, eunuchs would lead men and women to pass by, and the number of patrolling guards in the Imperial Palace was much higher than usual. The Imperial Palace was different from other places, where one could bring a large number of maids and guards, especially on a special occasion like tonight. Therefore, only Li Yi and Rui entered the Imperial Palace, while Mississippi Liu and Xiao Huan stayed at home. The two did not know any other nobles, so it was actually a little awkward on such an occasion. This was also one of the reasons why Li Yi was unwilling to attend other people's banquets, even if it was the old emperor's invitation. That place is the Food Bureau, which is responsible for the meals in the Imperial Palace. Almost all the dishes that can't be bought outside can be found there. Li Yi introduced casually to Rui. The Food Bureau was very busy that night, and one could see servants coming in and out at every moment. It was not easy to complete hundreds of banquets. From the Food Bureau to Yonghe Palace, there was almost a road formed by the servants of the Imperial Palace. At the end of the road, when the two were about to enter Yonghe Palace and Fengming Hall respectively, Li Yi suddenly felt something. He raised his head and saw a pair of eyes looking at him from not far away. "What a coincidence, Li Xianzi. I didn't expect that we would meet again so soon." Qin Yu slowly walked over with a smile on his face. Several young men followed behind him. When they saw Li Yi, their expressions changed slightly. What happened in the King of Shu's mansion last night was still fresh in their minds. Young Duke Qin was killed by Li Xianzi. They did not expect that they would meet again after only one day. It was really a case of enemies meeting each other. Looking at Qin Yu's happy face as if he could not suppress the joy of meeting an old friend, Li Yi began to admire him a little. A madman was indeed a madman. If it was a normal person, even if they didn't fight on the spot, they wouldn't have such a completely opposite attitude. Li Yi also had a smile on his face and said, Yes, I didn't expect that I would have such a deep fate with young Duke Qin. Let alone Qin Yu, even the young men behind him couldn't help but be startled when they heard this. Young Duke Qin had almost chopped off his hand, and he had also made young Duke Qin suffer a lot. When the two of them met, shouldn't it be tit for tat? Shouldn't one of them die? How could it be related to fate? Madman Qin was Madman Qin. It was normal for him to do things that were beyond common sense. But what about Li Xianzi? Could it be that he was admitting defeat? If he really wanted to give in, then he was gravely mistaken. When had those who had offended young Duke Qin ever had a good ending? How could the enmity be resolved just by admitting defeat? Yes, fate is really deep. Qin Yu murmured. When he saw the woman standing beside Li Yi, a trace of amazement flashed through his eyes. After a moment of daze, the smile on his face became even more brilliant. Could this be Madame Li? The expression on his face was a little surprised, but it was just right. It seemed normal, but those who knew him knew what this expression meant. The young men looked at each other and were slightly moved. It was obvious that young Duke Qin had taken a fancy to Madame Li. Moreover, with his relationship with Li Xianzi, they were afraid that he would not give up until he achieved his goal. With his personality, if he were to do something in secret, not even Prince Li Xian would be able to stop him. Qin Yu walked 2 steps closer to Li Yi and patted him on the shoulder. With a smile on his face, he whispered in his ear, "Madame Li Xianzi is really good." Although he was smiling, his voice was incomparably cold. The young men did not know what he said and looked slightly puzzled. Rui glanced at Qin Yu. Her expression did not change, but her eyes widened and a terrifying aura emerged. Li also smiled. This smile was somewhat inexplicable in the eyes of the young men, but in Qin Yu's eyes, it gave him a bad feeling. Just as this thought arose in his mind, he saw that the smile suddenly disappeared and then became incomparably cold. An afterimage rapidly enlarged in Qin Yu's eyes. The next moment it fell on his face. The severe pain instantly drowned his consciousness. Qin Yu staggered and fell to the ground. "Who do you think you are? How dare you insult His Majesty?" Li Yi looked at Qin Yu and said coldly. This slap came so suddenly that the young men behind Qin Yu were dumbfounded. What the hell was going on? Why did it suddenly involve insulting His Majesty? Could it be that what young Duke Qin said in that man's ear was insulting His Majesty? That was impossible. No matter how crazy Madman Qin was, he would never dare to do such a disgraceful thing. But Qin Yu spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt that a few teeth in his mouth had loosened. Half of his face had lost feeling and seemed to have swollen. He supported his body and slowly stood up. He could no longer maintain the smile on his face. He stood there and looked at Li Yi without any expression. Only a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He did not expect that the other party would dare to make a move in the palace under the watchful eyes of the public. Moreover, even if he had some skills, he had to admit that he could not have avoided that slap. Young Duke. Several young men hurriedly ran to Qin Yu's side. Chapter 392. The young men in front of Qin Yu didn't see clearly what had happened, but the guard leader's attitude suddenly changed. Did he forget that the person standing in front of him was young Duke Qin? Li Yi had only heard about the function of this token from the old eunuch Changda, but he didn't expect it to be so useful. No wonder he had such a disdainful expression when he said that he could make a scene in the capital. This token was really a good thing for this guard to treat Qin Yu's grandson like this. Young Duke Qin, this is the imperial palace. Please be careful with your words and actions. The guard leader warned Qin Yu with a sullen face. He didn't take any drastic action. After all, this young man with the intelligence division token could ignore Qin Yu, but he couldn't ignore him. "You." A young man in front of Qin Yu was about to speak angrily, but Qin Yu patted him on the shoulder and walked forward. He looked at Li Yi, cupped his fists and said calmly, "I admire you, I admire you. People always say that I, Qin Yu, am a madman, but it turns out that Li Xianzi and I are the same kind of people." "Oh no. Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm not as abnormal as young Duke Qin. I admit that I underestimated you." Qin Yu spat out another mouthful of blood and squinted at Li Yi. "Don't worry, it won't happen again. We will meet again soon." "Is this a threat?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. "What do you think?" Although half of Qin Yu's face was swollen, he still squeezed out a strange smile. "If that's the case, Li Yi sighed and used his true qi to slap the other half of Qin Yu's face. He said coldly, "Young Duke Qin, how can you insult His Majesty again?" This time Qin Yu directly fell to the ground and several teeth even flew out of his mouth. He could no longer laugh, nor could he speak, because he had already fainted. Although there was only a trace of true qi in Li Yi's body, if it was channeled to a specific part of his body, it could explode with extraordinary power. The young men were dumbfounded. How could he play such a trick in front of so many people? Did they really think that the Imperial Guards were blind? One of them pointed at the leader of the guards and said, Look, he slandered young Duke Qin just like that. Did you see that?" The guard leader's face stiffened. He roughly understood what had just happened. In Jingdo there truly were people who acted even more arrogantly than Duke Qin. Duke Qin, who had never been at a disadvantage, had no power to retaliate in front of him. "The few of you bring young Duke Qin away." He waved his hand at the other guards and instructed. Before the other young men could open their mouths, they were glared at by the leader of the guards. Then he smiled bitterly at the young man and said, "Sir, even if you don't give Duke Qin face, you still have to give Prime Minister Qin face. Otherwise, it will be hard to explain to His Majesty." To be able to take out that token meant that he was one of the Emperor's people. Who knew if this matter had the Emperor's intentions? Thus, the leader of the guard's attitude was very polite. Li Yi waved his hand. The 2 slaps just now were already very satisfying. He couldn't kill that disgusting guy here. Without even looking at Qin Yu, he turned and left with Rui. The leader of the guards let out a sigh of relief. As long as it didn't involve that special place or those special people, the matter would always be easily resolved. As for what young Duke Qin wanted to do in the future, that was his own business. "You guys, be gentler." The other nobles finally realized that there seemed to be some inside story that they didn't know about. They didn't dare to be arrogant anymore and followed closely behind the guards. That person didn't even care about young Duke Qin, so why would he care about them? "Is he that young Duke Qin?" The 2 of them walked side by side. Rui asked softly as she walked. Li Yi nodded. Rui also knew what happened last night. It had to be said that although the 2 slaps just now still made his palms a little numb, he was really happy in his heart, so much so that his mood became a lot better. He was not a generous person and was not used to holding grudges in his heart. It was best if he could take revenge on the spot. If he couldn't do it on the spot, he would do it as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would always keep it in his heart. It was suffocating. Rui said softly, "I also feel that he is not a good person." When others said not a good person, it was just a statement or ridicule. But whether it was said by Rui or Rui, it had another meaning. Although Rui was usually gentle and demure, if one really counted, she had killed many people, even far more than Mississippi Lu. In the early years she had killed all the outlaws wanted by the government. In her opinion, Qin Yu might not be much different from them. "What took you so long?" A familiar voice came from the front. Li Yi looked up and saw Li Xian walking over quickly. "Hello, sister-in-law." He first cupped his hands and bowed to Rui, then looked at Li Yi and asked, "I saw Qin Yu pass by here. You didn't see him, did you?" "I saw him." Li Yi nodded and said. "He didn't say anything?" Li Xian asked doubtfully. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I don't think he didn't." Li Xian shook his head, thinking that this was the imperial palace. Even if Qin Yu had 10 times the guts, he wouldn't dare to do anything here. He put this matter to the back of his mind and said, "I have a new idea." After saying this, he turned his head and looked at the woman behind him, saying, "Qin heir, you and sister-in-law go to Her Highness' place first. When the banquet is over, we will go find you." The princess nodded and walked to Rui's side. She very naturally held her hand and smiled, saying, "Sister, let's go in first. This is the princess, Li Xian's wife." Rui had never seen the princess before, so Li Yi introduced her to her. Rui nodded and said, "Then we will go first." Seeing the 2 walk into the Phoenix Cry Palace, Li Xian couldn't wait to pull Li Yi in the direction of Yonghe Palace. As they walked, he said, "I have a new idea. As long as there is an open ground, it will be fine. We don't need to jump down from a high place, but we can fly higher and it will be easier to control. This method seems to be more suitable on the battlefield. You want to use a galloping horse as a driving force to pull the kite up?" Li Yi casually asked. Li Xian's footsteps stopped and a sense of defeat immediately appeared on his face. He then looked at Li Yi bitterly and asked, Do you know why you didn't tell me earlier? Do you know how long it took me to think of this? Li Yi couldn't bear to hurt him and said, I just thought of it. To be able to think of this, you are already very amazing. Chapter 393. When it came to Li Xian, Li Yi had always adhered to the principle of, if you don't ask I won't tell. If you tell I'll tell. With Li Xian's perpetually high curiosity signal, all he had to do was throw a few modern physics textbooks at him, and he would be deeply engrossed in it. This guy even called her China just now. It seemed that the strategy of consort was very effective. He couldn't bring him back to that path of no return. Li Xian's frustration only lasted for a moment before he put it to the back of his mind. He began to discuss with Li Yi how his idea should be implemented and the various details. He even took out an intricate drawing from his sleeve. The two of them sat at a table in the corner and discussed in low voices. The old emperor's banquet was held in Yonghe Palace. However, a small palace couldn't accommodate so many people. To ensure that there was enough space, the palace was filled with short tables that extended all the way to the open space outside the palace. Those who didn't have the status to enter the palace could only sit in the open space outside the palace. Even so, it was still a great honor for them. Li Yi could be considered to have a small status now. If he were to be ranked, he would at least be able to occupy a small spot in the palace. At this time, the banquet hadn't officially started and the emperor hadn't arrived yet. Many of the officials were like him and Li Xian, chatting and laughing in low voices. With nothing to do, Li Yi's gaze fell on the drawing that Li Xian had spread on the table. After a moment of shock, he said, "This drawing was drawn by you? I haven't seen you for a few days and you've improved a lot." Although Li Yi, who was from an engineering background, had forgotten all his previous professional knowledge, drawing was a basic ability that he had not lost until now. Especially after studying drawing, his level was several levels higher than before. The drawings that Li Xian drew in the past could only be called concept drawings. They were ugly beyond belief. It had only been a few days since they last met, but he was able to draw such a neat drawing that it looked like a work of art. How could this improvement be described with the word fast? Li Xian laughed dryly and said, "Of course I didn't draw this. China is skilled in the art of painting, so I asked her to draw it for me." Li Yi shook his head. China and China were so intimate. It was really not easy for His Highness to be enlightened in this aspect. From the perspective of a friend, Li Yi felt very gratified. Finally, he didn't have to worry about his sexual orientation or whether he would have designs on him. Li Xian was the crown prince and was highly valued by the emperor, so his seat was naturally not next to Li Yi's. However, a fifth-ranked official next to Li Yi had been kicked off somewhere by Li Xian, so he naturally occupied the other's seat. "How much do you know about Qin Yu?" Li Yi casually asked. Li Xian furrowed his brows and said, "This person is a complete scoundrel or perhaps a madman. He does things without any rules like a mad dog. When he's angry, he doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. If it was just him, naturally no one would be afraid of him, but with the addition of Prime Minister Qin's manner, there aren't many people in the capital who are willing to offend him." Li Yi asked again, "In the entire capital, is there really no one who can control him?" Li Xian shook his head and said, "That's not the case. The problem is that although Qin Yu is arrogant, it's only because he doesn't cultivate morality. He doesn't touch the interests of the nobles. Out of respect for Prime Minister Qin, very few people are willing to meddle in his affairs. On the other hand, Prime Minister Qin is very strict with him. Every time he causes trouble, he will be grounded at home for a period of time. However, after he is released, he is still the same. To tell the truth, when it comes to that mad dog, even I don't want to have anything to do with him." Li Xian looked at him and said, "However, you don't have to worry. His methods are useless on you. Furthermore, with his personality, he didn't say or do anything just now. It's clear that he doesn't care about you." In Li Xian's view, the person who offended Qin Yu the most last night was himself. The person Qin Yu hated the most was presumably him. This was also the reason why he made a move. "He didn't do anything." Li Yi smiled and said, "It's just that I slapped him twice just now, knocked out a few of his teeth and knocked him unconscious." Li Xian looked at him. The host of tonight's banquet was, of course, the old emperor. In reality, as long as it was in the Jing kingdom, no matter the occasion, he was the only host. However, tonight, in addition to Emperor Jing, who was shining as always, there was another person who was also shining brightly. It was a middle-aged man with a thin face. He was not tall and was sitting in front of the generals. Even when Emperor Jing praised him in front of all the civil and military officials, he still had a solemn expression on his face. It seemed that he was out of tune with the atmosphere of tonight's banquet. However, no one thought that he was abnormal because he was the most serious person in the Jing kingdom. Because he was Su Dingyuan, the god of war of the Jing kingdom. It was also the first time that Li Yi saw this legendary general. However, because he was a little far away, he could only see a silhouette and could not see what he looked like. Fortunately, he was not curious about the god of war's appearance. Instead, he was more interested in the singing and dancing in the middle of the hall. The standard of the court musicians and dancers was not just for show. As the king of a country, he definitely wanted to keep the best things in the palace. These entertainment programs were many times more professional than what Li Yi had seen in the brothel. Li Xian clearly didn't have the same level of appreciation. At this moment he was still muttering, "With that madman's personality, you guys won't rest until you're dead. Who knows what that madman will do? Why don't you just kill him secretly?" Li Xian turned to look at Li Yi and said, "You have a lot of evil ideas. Think about how to kill him secretly. That guy, once he is dead, everything will be over. Your Highness, who do you want to kill? Do you need my help?" A rough voice came from behind. Li Xian was shocked and quickly turned his head. When he saw the old man in luxurious clothes standing behind him, he smiled awkwardly and said, "General Shui, you misheard me. I am the supervisor. How could I do that kind of thing? Looks like this old man is getting old. My ears aren't as good." The white-haired old man with a ruddy complexion laughed and said, "This is General Shui." To cover up his embarrassment, Li Xian hurriedly introduced him to Li Yi. He only said this because he believed that Li Yi must have heard of General Shui's name. If General Su Dingyuan was the current god of war of the Jing kingdom, then before him this title had always belonged to the old man in front of him. As long as it was a citizen of the Jing kingdom who had not heard of his name. Even General Su was a student taught by him. General Shui? Li Yi was stunned for a moment. When he regained his senses, he immediately stood up and said, "Greetings, old General Shui. Ah, old Shui, let's see what you can brag about in the future. What do you mean by the national general that everyone knows in the Jing kingdom? I have never heard of your name." Another burst of laughter came from behind. Soon a few figures walked in front of the three of them. General Shui, who had spoken earlier, now had a face as black as the bottom of a pot. There was a hint of shame and anger on his face as he stared at Li Yi with his bell-like eyes and said loudly, "Boy, have you really not heard of my name?" Chapter 394. He was indeed a general. Although the old man was old, his body was still strong. Although his eyes were as big as copper bells, he did not look imposing. However, Li Yi did not understand. He was not born and raised in this world, so how would he know the name of this old general? He was not Shui Rengui or Shui Jiqian. It was not strange that he did not know his name since he had never heard of his stories or songs. The moonlight tonight is not bad. Old General Shui, please have a seat. I'll go out and look at the moon for a while." "Excuse me." Li Yi cleverly changed the topic. He did not want to embarrass the old general or himself. The people behind General Shui laughed even louder. They also felt that this young man was too ignorant for not knowing Shui Wanqing's name. After all, for a young man of his age, he should have heard of this name since he was a child. However, being able to personally witness the most arrogant fellow among them being humiliated made them feel rather delighted. "This is General Shui Wanqing." Li Xian reminded him in a low voice. There was only one General Shui in the Jing kingdom. If Li Yi did not know him, he could not do anything about it. It's General Shui." Li Yi revealed an expression of sudden realization and hurriedly said, "Old General Shui, please don't blame me. This is the first time I've attended a banquet of this level, so I was a little nervous and didn't remember. Old General Shui's name is really well known. I've heard of your deeds since I was young. To be able to meet you today is really the honor of 3 lifetimes." Who didn't know how to say polite words? From the looks of it, this old general was really a celebrity. In order to express the joy and excitement of a fan meeting his idol, Li Yi felt that he had used all the acting skills he had learned in 2 lifetimes. If it was not for the fact that autographs were not popular in this era, he could have acted more realistically. "Oh, then why don't you tell me what I've done?" The old man stroked his beard and seemed to have accepted Li Yi's explanation. After all, there were not many people in this generation who had not heard of his name. He casually asked another question. A black line appeared on Li Yi's face once again. Was this old man looking for an awkward situation? He suddenly laughed again and looked out of the hall. He praised, "The moon tonight is really nice." Old General Shui exerted some force and pulled a few strands of beard from his chin. Li Yi and Li Xian were surrounded by a group of generals. "I say, was Tian Fa really created by you?" The famous General Shui sat in front of Li Yi and said as he tore apart a juicy chicken leg. Li Yi didn't dare to say that the reason the drumstick was still there was because he had accidentally dropped it on the ground. Hearing his words, Li Yi glanced at the old emperor's seat and didn't say a word. Even if Li Xian asked him about this, he would not be able to get any useful information. Hearing the two words, divine punishment, Li Xian's spirit was clearly aroused. He hurriedly pricked up his ears to listen. "Not bad, kid. Remember, you can't tell anyone except His Majesty." General Shui nodded and said with satisfaction. "But..." After he said that, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "That thing belongs to the military. Although we don't know the formula, the old guys here know better than anyone else how many things it can contain and how many people it can kill. You don't have to hide it." Only then did Li Yi realize that the people present were the most senior group of people in the Jing Kingdom's military. Other than the formula that the emperor would not tell them, there was no way he could hide anything else from them. Since that was the case, there was nothing to worry about. Li Yi said straightforwardly, "That's right. That thing was created by me." "Well done." Another old general patted his knee and did not hide the admiration on his face. "His Majesty is becoming more and more stingy, but he is only rewarded with a Viscount title." Another old general ridiculed him and asked, "I heard that horseshoes were also created by you." "I think so. The method to save people on the battlefield was also created by you?" "Maybe," Li Yi thought to himself. A general was indeed a general. Even his words were so direct. The words created and created were too crude. "Think about it. Do you want to train in the military for a few years?" General Shui stared at him with shining eyes and said, "Such a good seedling, it would be a pity not to put you in the military. With you there will be fewer soldiers sacrificed. I will let Ding Yuan teach you personally. Who knows, maybe in a few years the Jing Kingdom will have the youngest general in history." Li Yi's eyelids twitched. It was already scary enough to be an official in the imperial court. What would happen if he were to enter the military? How long would it take to see Rui if he had to face a bunch of rough men every day? Moreover, who would be willing to be taught by that stern face? He rejected old General Shui's suggestion without even thinking about it. When he habitually looked at the moon outside the hall, General Shui impatiently waved his hand and said, "Stop looking. There is no moon tonight." Li Yi retracted his gaze and picked up the teacup on the table. He carefully examined it and could not help but exclaim, "The workmanship of this cup is really exquisite. I wonder where it was made." General Shui's face darkened and said, "Just like what His Majesty said, you are a little kid. You are so young but you are so ambitious. How many people have begged for it but you do not care? Are you planning to be a lousy county magistrate for the rest of your life?" "Ah, what material are these chopsticks made of? Don't tell me they are made of jade? This is the palace after all." Even chopsticks are so luxurious. The few old generals looked at each other speechlessly. They knew that their plan to recruit him into the military was going to fail. Horseshoes, heavenly punishment, and even the method to save the injured soldiers. Every one of these matters was extremely important to them. If such a person could not be used by the military, even the heavens would not allow it. When they first made this request to His Majesty had said that as long as they could get his consent, he could be trained in the military. They thought that it would be a simple matter if they worked together. Who would have thought that when faced with old Shui's straightforward recruitment, he would actually study the teacup and chopsticks? No matter how much they had prepared, it was useless in this situation. If it was someone else, they would not care so much. They would first kidnap him into the military. Once there, His Majesty's words would not be of any use. However, His Majesty had clearly said that they were not to force this young man in front of them. If they did not force him, they would not know where to start. Even when they were surrounded by the enemy, the few old generals had not had such a headache. Chapter 395. Forget it, forget it. If you don't want to go to the army, I won't force you. But remember, if you encounter any problems in the future, you can come to us old fellows. Let's not talk about other things, but we can protect you in the capital. Just as Li Yi was about to go against his conscience and praise the table in front of him for being rare, old General Shui seemed to have given up and finally waved his hand. There's still one thing that I don't understand. Li Yi finally regained his composure as he looked at old General Shui. You want to ask us why we old fellows are so nice to you? Old General Shui asked without even lifting his head. Li Yi thought to himself that these old generals weren't as rash and boorish as they appeared to be. Their words and actions were clear and logical, and they could even think of things that he couldn't think of. After all, they were old men who had lived for decades and were older than both of Li Yi's lifetimes combined. They could see through Li Yi's thoughts with a single glance. The old fox had grown into an old fox. When he met these old generals or old men in the future, he must not underestimate them. You'll understand when you actually arrive on the battlefield, old General Shui said faintly as a look of reminiscence appeared on his face. No one knew better than these old generals how powerful the thing he had invented was on the battlefield. Which of the old generals present hadn't killed their way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood? They had experienced countless battles in their lives. Without them, the Jing kingdom wouldn't have existed. In every battle, it was their brothers and comrades who sacrificed themselves. The family of generals had been on the decline since ancient times. No one knew when or where a descendant of the family of generals would die on the battlefield. The young man in front of them had given them a huge gift. A huge gift. Compared to this huge gift, a small repayment was not worth mentioning at all. It was just that Li Yi hadn't realized this yet. As he watched the old generals leave, Li Xian immediately cast an envious gaze over. For old General Shui to say such words, it means that he really values you. With so many old generals standing behind you, you can do whatever you want in the capital city in the future. Li Xian was really envious. These old generals had fought for the country all their lives. Their fathers, themselves, and their descendants had all done their best for the country. What they did was the most dangerous and important thing. Because of this, His Majesty attached great importance to the family of generals. It could even be said that he favored them. In the capital, these old generals were unreasonable existences. Even if Li Xian met them, he would have to be respectful. Li Yi inexplicably received the old general's promise. Apart from feeling surprised, he was also happy. He looked at Li Xian and asked, "Walk sideways? Does that mean that the next time I meet the king of Shu I can slap him hard?" Li Xian was stunned for a moment. It took him a while to react. He shook his head and said, "The king of Shu is a prince. His face is the face of the royal family. If you slap him, you will be slapping the royal family. The king of Shu will not forgive you, and neither will Uncle Huang." "Is that so?" Li Yi couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Other than slapping the king of Shu, he didn't seem to have anything else that he wanted to do but couldn't. Then he thought of something and asked, "What about killing Qin Yu?" When Li Xian heard this, he immediately became interested. He whispered, "That's possible, but you have to do it secretly. Don't get caught. Prime Minister Qin isn't someone to be trifled with. If something really happens, even Uncle Huang won't be able to protect us. In short, this matter can't be done hastily. We have to plan it carefully." Just as Li Yi and Li Xian were discussing how to kill Madman Qin without being discovered, on the other side of the hall, Prime Minister Qin was chatting with a few other officials. Then he walked back to his seat, looked around the hall, and furrowed his brows. At this moment, a young man hurriedly came from behind and said, "Grandfather Qin, it's bad. Young Duke Qin, what did this bastard do this time?" After a moment, Prime Minister Qin frowned and looked in a certain direction at the entrance of the hall. "I think it's a good idea to hire someone to kill Qin Yu. Qin Yu doesn't have many guards. If we hire a powerful assassin with a lot of money, we can make him disappear forever. Even if we are caught, they won't be able to find out our identities. Qin Yu has too many enemies and there are too many people who want him dead." Li Xian felt that he had come up with a brilliant idea. In his complacency, he raised his voice. However, he didn't notice that an official dressed in a scarlet official's robe was already dumbfounded. Through his idea, Li Yi summed up 18 ways for young Duke Qin to die. He inadvertently raised his head and seemed to see someone looking in his direction. When he looked carefully, he only saw the figures of a few unfamiliar officials. The feeling just now seemed to have never appeared. He shook his head and began to think about other things. He had Li Xian to accompany him here, so he had someone to talk to. He didn't know how Rui was doing. Young princess was born in a rich family and should not have much in common with her. He didn't know if she would be bored. The hall was full of singing and dancing, and it seemed that no one was paying attention to this side. Li sneaked out. He had just stepped out of the hall and walked a few steps when he heard a faint voice behind him. Even if Qin Yu has offended you in some way, isn't it too heavy for the county magistrate of Chang'an? Li looked back and saw an old man in plain clothes standing behind him. The old man said calmly. The old man's clothes were very ordinary, and his appearance was even more ordinary. Only his eyes were particularly sharp, as if they could see through people's hearts at a glance. Prime Minister Qin? Li stopped and looked at the old man. The old man didn't admit or deny it. After a moment, Li smiled and said, Prime Minister Qin, you know what kind of person Qin Yu is. I think you have a conclusion in your mind whether I was heavy or not. Why do you say this? The old man frowned slightly. He was a righteous man. If others had done those things, he would have already stopped them. However, when it involved the only legitimate son of the Qin family, he naturally couldn't treat him as an ordinary person. When he made a mistake, he could punish him however he wanted. In fact, he had always been strict with Qin Yu at home. However, he didn't want to let outsiders do these things for him. Li didn't defend himself. He directly tore apart all the concealment and went straight to his heart. As the prime minister, he must know better than anyone else what was right or wrong, right or wrong. This bastard. Prime Minister Qin cursed in his heart. Naturally, he thought of some dirty things and thought that maybe he should discipline him well. Otherwise, the reputation that the Qin family had accumulated for decades would be ruined in his hands. However, being questioned by a young man in his face, Prime Minister Qin still felt a little embarrassed. He snorted coldly, turned around and walked back in. Li curled his lips. This old man still cared about his face. His impression in Li's heart slightly increased by 0.01 points. He didn't know if the Empress's birthday banquet was over. He walked out of the hall and took a look. No one came out, so it should still be in progress. When he was about to sneak back, he suddenly stopped and saw a small figure sitting on the corner of the steps of Yonghe Palace in the night. Chapter 396. Li walked over slowly. The palace maids and eunuchs guarding Princess Yongning looked up and bowed slightly to him. They didn't stop him. In this world, among all the people the little princess had met, only this young county magistrate wouldn't make her feel repulsed. Li sat down next to her. Princess Yongning looked back and then turned back to look at the lights in front of her. There was no expression on her little face. Li looked at her eyes carefully. Even in the dark there was light in them, but there was no life in them. He had seen closed and depressed eyes before, and they seemed to be different from the eyes in front of him. This made Li feel that the situation wasn't that bad. It seemed that she just didn't want to talk to people. Of course, this was something to be happy about. Li sat for a while, then stood up and walked into the hall. The little girl's face was slightly tilted at an unnoticeable angle. The light in her eyes dimmed slightly. She grabbed the hem of her robe a little harder, then quickly loosened it. After a while, she stood up and prepared to walk to the palace in the distance. It was dark and quiet there. She wouldn't go there unless she was sleeping. Are you leaving? A familiar voice suddenly came from behind. She stopped in her tracks and slowly turned around. Li had a chicken leg in his mouth and 2 plates in his hands. He put them on the well-lit steps. Hurry up, hurry up. He waved at Li Xian, who was also holding something in his hands. Although Li Xian's eyes were puzzled, he still put the things on the steps. Okay, put the things down and you can go back. Alright, see if there's any grape wine on the table. Forget it, wine is still wine. I don't need it. Li waved his hand and said to him. Li Xian didn't care about Li Yi's behavior. Instead, he was surprised by the way Li Yi acted. He looked at Princess Yongning in surprise and turned to leave. Do you want some? Li Yi handed a pair of chopsticks to the little girl. When he was sitting inside, he actually didn't have much appetite. He wasn't interested in even the most exquisite dishes. Instead, he felt that eating on the steps outside was more atmosphere, mainly because it was quiet. There wouldn't be Li Xian nagging by his ear, and there wouldn't be those old generals bothering him. Princess Yongning didn't speak. Until now, Li Yi hadn't heard her say even a word. I have to leave for a while, Li Yi said as he ate. So, we might not see each other for a long time. When I come back, I'll treat you to a good meal. Yongning only lowered her head to eat and did not respond to Li Yi's words. Li Yi was already used to this kind of silence. Seeing that she liked to eat the dish next to him, he switched the dish next to her. Then he put down his chopsticks and quietly looked at the palace wall in the distance. From time to time, there would be some noise coming from inside the palace. In the distance, there was a tall palace wall that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was like a cage, causing people to involuntarily have a suffocating feeling. At this time, Li Yi thought of something he hadn't thought of for a long time. He had been here for half a year. What was the other world like? Forgetting was human nature. Except for a few people, no one remembered who he was. When he first came to this world, he would think about how to go back almost every day. It had been a long time since he had thought about this. At this moment, he did not immerse himself in such emotions for long, because people started coming out of the palace behind him. The banquet was over. Li Yi stood up and waved to the little girl. See you next time. When he walked outside, a middle-aged palace maid came over and begged, I hope you can come to the palace often to see the little princess. It's not easy for the little princess. Li Yi looked at her and nodded. He looked back at the little girl sitting on the steps and walked to Li Xian, who was waving at him. Just as he disappeared behind a wall, Princess Yongning stood up. Several eunuchs and palace maids hurried over and led her to the depths of the palace. As if it had been planned, the banquet of the old emperor and empress ended at the same time. When Li Yi and Li Xian walked to the front of the Phoenix Cry Palace, they saw the women coming out of the palace. There were quite a few people waiting outside the hall like them. After all, many of the people who came to the imperial palace tonight were husband and wife. Li Yi and Li Xian waited until almost everyone had left before the figures of the crown princess and Rui appeared in their line of sight. To be more accurate, it was not 2 people but 3. When Li Yi saw the woman and Rui walking side by side, his body shook. Surprise and astonishment flashed across his face. Then his expression became extremely complicated. How could it be her? Although she was about the same age as his aunt, the last time he saw her she had only been in her early 20s. Now she was so haggard, particularly from the white hair occasionally peeking out from her temples. It was difficult to imagine what she had experienced during this period of time. If there were people in Jingdo that Li Yi did not want to face, Qin Yu would not be in the top 10 and the old emperor would not be first. This young lady of the Qin family was the one he did not want to see the most. Since he had accepted Li Yi's identity, when he met this young lady of the Qin family, he could not help but feel guilty. Normal people would not be able to understand this kind of feeling. Even if the original owner of this body was still alive, he would not be able to understand the conflicting and complicated feelings in his heart. It was nothing, don't worry about it. When Rui walked over, she was still smiling and talking to the woman. The woman only smiled. When she saw a certain figure standing not too far away, her body trembled slightly, and a hint of excitement flashed in her eyes. Soon after, she seemed to have thought of something, and that hint of excitement quickly disappeared, replaced by a hint of pain. My husband and Li Xianzi are already waiting for us there. The crown princess smiled and looked at the woman. I don't know if your family has come. We will be leaving first. The woman nodded and then raised her head to look at Li Yi. She said, your wife is very good. You know my husband? Rui looked at her with some surprise and asked. This time the woman did not reply. She walked forward on her own and quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. Husband this. Rui looked at the woman's departing figure and then looked at Li Yi. Her heart was filled with confusion. It's a long story. We will talk about it when we get back. Li Yi sighed and felt inexplicably suffocated in his heart. Seeing such a story in an opera would not be able to move people much. However, when it really happened in front of his eyes and he saw the change of the woman in just a few days, from her beautiful face to her old face, from her fine black hair to her white hair, Li Yi could only sigh in his heart and curse his sins. Li Minghan, you are a mother*** king bastard. In the end he could not help but curse in a low voice. Who is a bastard? Li Xian turned his head to look at Li Yi in confusion. He thought that even Qin Yu had not been scolded like this. It seemed that the person he cursed just now must have offended him greatly. Chapter 397. Just now, a palace maid dropped a tray and almost hit that lady. I happened to be next to her, so I just happened to help her. Later, she took the initiative to tell me many things about the capital. Does my husband know that lady? In the carriage, Rui told Li Yi about what had just happened. Li Yi sighed. There was no need to hide this matter from Rui. He told her the cause and effect of the matter from beginning to end. Something like this happened? Rui was shocked. She didn't expect that the lady she got along well with just now would have such a grudge against the Li family, and it even involved her late father-in-law. This was the first time she heard about the past, so she felt a little sad. She felt that the lady was too pitiful, but she didn't curse like Mississippi Lu. Seeing that Li Yi seemed to be a little depressed, she quickly comforted him. My husband, you don't need to blame yourself too much. After all, you weren't born at that time. It's not your fault. Seeing her like this, I still feel a little sad, Li Yi said. Because my husband is a good person. Rui smiled and said, even if this didn't happen to us, my husband would still feel bad. Li Yi shook his head. Li Minghan had already passed away, so this matter had become a dead knot that couldn't be untied. Even if he felt a little guilty, he couldn't do anything about it. He drove this thought out of his mind, looked down at Rui and revealed an evil smile. He whispered, whether your husband is a good person or not, you'll know tonight. Rui was stunned when she heard this. Then she seemed to think of something and her pretty face began to burn. Our Qin family's face has been completely lost because of you. In the Qin family, a middle-aged man in a brocade robe pointed at Qin Yu, who was sitting in the hall, and said angrily, how can the Qin family lose face for me? Both sides of Qin Yu's face were still swollen, making him look quite miserable. Facing the middle-aged man's reprimand, he didn't mind it at all. He picked up the teacup beside him and took a sip. You unfilial son, what did you say? The veins on the middle-aged man's forehead bulged as he strode over. He raised his hand, but when he saw Qin Yu's swollen cheek, he didn't lower his hand. Enough. Qin Xiang, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. He looked at Qin Yu with disappointment and said, recently there has been a storm in the imperial court. Our Qin family has also been involved. You'd better restrain yourself. Qin Xiang didn't say anything about Qin Yu's injury. He subconsciously thought that his grandson had done something shameless again. If this matter was blown out of proportion, he was afraid that it would be even more difficult to clean up. After this incident, it might not be a bad thing for him to restrain himself a little and be fearful of him. Restrain. A sarcastic smile appeared on Qin Yu's face as he said, when you killed my mother in front of me, did you ever think of restraining yourself? Unfilial son, what did you say? The middle-aged man's body shook when he heard this. He fiercely slammed the table next to him and grabbed Qin Yu's collar. His eyes looked like they were about to pop out of their sockets. What? Did I say something wrong? The sarcastic expression on Qin Yu's face became even stronger. He didn't fear the middle-aged man at all, even if the other party was his father. The faces of several core members of the Qin family in the hall suddenly changed. They were also one of the participants in that incident, so how could they not remember? The Qin family's scholarly family valued reputation and chastity the most. How could a woman who didn't abide by the rules of a woman become the first wife of the Qin family? A family's shame shouldn't be aired in public. That incident couldn't be made public, and it also couldn't tarnish the Qin family's reputation. So, including the head of the family at that time, they strangled the woman to death in front of the Qin family's ancestors. However, who would have thought that Qin Yu, who was only 8 years old at that time, was hiding under the table in front of him and watching his mother being strangled to death by his father with his grandfather and uncle standing to the side. This matter had almost become a taboo in the Qin family. At this time, when Qin Yu brought it up again, everyone felt that they had lost face. Because of Qin Yu, the Qin family had lost face in front of outsiders many times. Qin Xiang closed his eyes, and the blue veins on the back of his skinny hand constantly pulsed. After a long time, he squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. Qin Yu is grounded at home for half a year. Without my permission, he is not allowed to take a step out of the Qin family. After saying this, he slowly stood up and quickly disappeared from the hall with the help of an old servant. Everyone, including the middle-aged man after glancing at Chinyu, also stood up and left. Chinyu reached out and touched his cheek. Because of the pain, the corners of his mouth twitched instinctively. He said with some regret, "Half a year, it's really a bit long. It's not easy for an interesting person to appear in the capital. What a pity, what a pity." Early in the morning in the Viscount's mansion, a servant girl suddenly screamed from a room. Hearing the sound, the housekeeper, Uncle Lee, frowned and reprimanded. "Why are you screaming so early in the morning? If you disturb the young master and young madam, you will lose your reward for this month." Uncle Lee, Lord Juhi." The servant girl stood at the door and stammered as she handed a letter to housekeeper Lee. "A letter from the young master?" A trace of doubt appeared on Uncle Lee's face as he quickly opened the letter. After a moment, the expression on his face changed to one of astonishment and shock. Not long after, the entire Viscount's mansion was completely in an uproar. While the Viscount's mansion was in chaos, Li stood on the deck, basking in the sun and enjoying the warm wind. Looking at the vast river, he felt every pore on his body open up. The honeymoon plan and Rui had been in preparation for a long time. Finally, this morning, while everyone was still in bed, the two of them sneaked out of the house and experienced the feeling of eloping. Thinking about how furious Mississippi Lou would be when they sneaked out, he couldn't help but smile. It was just that it was wrong to hide it from Xiao Huan. She might be sad for a few days, and it was inevitable that her imagination would run wild. If he didn't coax her when he got back, it would be fine. Little girls are the most foolish and easy to fool. At this time, it would be great if there was a glass of iced grape wine, Li murmured. If he could enjoy the river breeze, drink wine, and recite a few lines of poetry, it would be very coquettish. The river flows beyond the heaven and earth, the mountains are in the void. The great river flows east, the waves wash away all the heroes of the ages. The lonely sail is far away in the blue sky only. What is this river called again? Suddenly, a slender hand reached out from the side, two slender fingers holding a wine glass. The glass was clear and transparent, exuding a familiar, intoxicating smell. If it wasn't his favorite grape wine, what else could it be? He subconsciously took the wine glass, and the next moment Xiao Huan's soft voice came over. "Young master, we can't find ice on the boat, so we can only make do." It was fine if he couldn't find ice, but it was good enough to have wine. His little maid was the most considerate, always delivering what he needed the most at the critical moment. As Li thought so, he drank the wine in one gulp. Then he realized that something was wrong. When he turned his head, he saw the little maid standing behind him, smiling like a flower. Then he looked to the side in the direction of the grape wine, and saw Mississippi Lou looking at him with a sword in one hand, a cold smile on her face. Flirtatious, continue flirtatious. Chapter 398. Caught in the act of eloping, Li couldn't continue. Qing and Prefecture and Jingdo were two of the most prosperous cities in Jing Kingdom. Naturally, there was a lot of trade between them. There were often boats on the river. They were now on a medium-sized passenger ship. When he sneaked out in the morning, he didn't alert Mississippi Lou and Xiao Huan because they had left earlier than him and stayed in the compartment next to her and Rui. Only now did Li remember that Xiao Huan had looked at him strangely these days and often ran to Mississippi Lou's room. But because the servant girl had always been obedient, he didn't suspect anything. Now that he thought about it, they should have known about this plan a long time ago. Xiao Huan might really be angry. She was still hiding far away and ignoring him. This was the first time this had happened. There was no such thing as a honeymoon in this world. They wouldn't really think that he was going to elope with Rui and abandon them, would they? Li walked over and looked at her with a smile. "What's wrong, are you still angry?" Hearing the young master's voice, the servant girl's face lit up. But thinking of second Mrs. Warning, she immediately kept a straight face and turned her head away from him. Li turned again and pinched her face. "Are you really angry at young master?" The servant girl's face was very fleshy. Especially when they were in Willow Village, Li liked to pinch it. Later, for some reason, the days got better and better. Her cheeks were no longer as baby fat as before and slowly shrunk. Her oval face had the tendency to change into an oval face. She lost some of her cuteness but became more beautiful. The little girl was about to become a big girl. Li looked at her slightly pouting little mouth. His mind was filled with the scenes of the few of them getting along in the past 6 months. At this moment there were only 4 people in the room. It was like after going around in circles, everything had returned to square one. The servant girl finally turned her head and looked at him with large, watery eyes. She said with a sob in her voice, "Young master, do you and Miss not want us any more?" There was sadness in her voice, like a little animal that had been heartlessly abandoned. To her that was the truth. The son-in-law and the young lady were everything to her. If they all left, leaving her and the second young lady alone in the capital, even if they could eat delicacies every day and have maids and servants to serve them, what was the point? Seeing that her eyes were filled with tears, Li suddenly felt a little worried, and a strong sense of guilt welled up in his heart. He seemed to only consider him and Rui, but neglected Xiao Huan and Rui's feelings. Their way of thinking was completely different from his. Leaving without a word like this might really make them think more. No matter where young master and Miss go in the future, they will take you with them. Li held her shoulders and patted her gently. Really? The young maidservant's eyes were still misty. She wiped her eyes with her hands, revealing her dimples. "You've stopped crying so quickly?" Li looked at her in surprise. "You've learned to cry and act pitiful. Who taught you this?" Having been exposed by Li, the young maidservant blushed and ran away in a hurry. Ignoring her little thoughts, Li sat back down at the table and continued his unfinished work. The distance from the capital to Qing and prefecture was not very far. Following the river, if the speed was fast, it would only take a day and a night to arrive. However, this passenger ship was not transporting any important goods, and there was no urgent matter, so there was no need to travel so quickly. It was leisurely and would take about 3 days to arrive. This time Li was not in a hurry. He had long wanted to see the famous mountains and rivers of this world. On the table was a simple map that he had asked Li Xian to get. The main drawing on it was the waterways between Qing and prefecture and the capital. The maps of this world were far from being as detailed and standard as those of the future. Usually only the government and the imperial court would use them. The emphasis was on practicality. They were either next to mountains or next to rivers. There were no satellites, so they had to be manually measured. Li marked a few asterisks on the map, representing a few important cities in the Jing kingdom. He used lines to connect them and finally formed a map from the capital to Qing and prefecture. He planned to stop at these places for a day or two to look at the mountains, the rivers, and the scenery. He wanted to see the differences in the beauty of different places in the Jing kingdom and enjoy life. His dream in his previous life was to earn enough money to travel around the world. He wanted to see different sceneries, experience different customs, and experience the beauty of the world. Of course, the last dream could not be realized in his previous life, and the possibility of it being realized in this life was not very high. One should be down to earth, cherish life, and stay away from beauty. Did the young master really leave? Uncle Li, the housekeeper, held a letter in his hand. He was stunned and his face was still full of disbelief. He felt that the young master's way of doing things in the past was capricious enough. He did not expect that he still had a very shallow understanding of the young master's capriciousness. How should he explain this to Madame Dowager? All the maids and servants in the Viscount's mansion, including the guards, did not know when the master and Madame left. Not to mention the maids and servants, the guards might feel a burning pain on their faces. Their duty was to protect the main house. Now that everyone had run away, who were they supposed to protect? Uncle Li held the letter. The letter only said that the young master and Madame would go back to Qing and prefecture and told them not to worry. As for when they would come back, he did not know. When he drove to the Li mansion to inform Madame Dowager, he still wanted to cry but had no tears. It was fine to leave, but at least tell them and bring a few guards. How could the master leave without saying goodbye? Madame and the others were all women. What if something happened to them? What? They left? Li Xian jumped down from the carriage and stood at the door of the Viscount's mansion. He looked at the servant and asked, "Where did they go? When will they come back?" The servant could only shake his head helplessly. He only knew that the Viscount, Madame's second miss, and Miss Xiao Huan had all disappeared this morning. They only left a letter for housekeeper Li. As for more things, it was not something that he could come into contact with. Li Xian broke into the mansion in disbelief. After a long time he came out with a dumbfounded face. They left just like that. He originally wanted to find Li Yi to talk about some of his new ideas and have a meal. He did not expect to receive such news. This immediately made him feel disappointed. Go back. He looked back at the Viscount's mansion and got into the carriage with some depression. They really left just like that. Not long after, in the depths of the palace, Emperor Jing looked at the paper on the table and showed an expression of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Chapter 399. In the capital, there was a vast piece of flat land behind the Crown Prince's residence. 2 months ago, Li Xian had bought this piece of land. At this moment, a galloping steed galloped along a fixed route under the urging of the rider on its back. A rope was tied to the horse, which was connected to a black spot in the distant sky. A person with good eyesight would be able to see that the black dot was actually a huge kite. Under the peculiarly shaped kite was a black dog with wide, panic-stricken dog eyes. It was looking down at the mountains and rivers beneath it like a king, while cursing the 18 generations of ancestors of the guy who sent it to heaven in his heart. Even though it had flown countless times, it was still a dog. How could a dog be expected to get used to the sky? For it, flying around in the sky with its dog guts was far less interesting than doing happy things with its wife while Lao Wang was not around. Not many people cared what kind of mood the dog was in when it was flying. Several figures stood below and recorded some data on a piece of paper from time to time. There had been no problems in the experiment for half a month, which meant that they would not be able to eat dog meat hot pot for a long time. It was really a sad thing. At noon in April the weather was sunny, but it was actually a bit hot. Craning his neck for a long time was tiring and also a bit hot. Li Xian took off his outer robe and threw it on the grass beside him. My husband, several concubines in the palace have sent people to ask what kind of perfume will be released next. The madams of those noble families have also invited me many times. The crown prince's wife walked over from a distance, followed by a faint fragrance. Smelling his favorite orchid fragrance, Li Xian was slightly refreshed and said, "Didn't I say that Uncle Huang can't smell that kind of fragrance? What do these concubines want?" A wry smile appeared on Crown Prince Consort's face. Princess Yongle Li Xianzi and their family had cooperated in the perfume business, which had caused an unimaginable sensation in the capital. All women, regardless of their status, were infatuated with it. Several perfume shops in the capital had already closed down a month ago. His Majesty's concubine was also a woman with the most distinguished status. How could she be inferior to ordinary people in this kind of business? Even her maiden family had hinted that they wanted to cooperate with her several times. She couldn't imagine how much profit this perfume business would bring if even the Wang family couldn't help but be tempted. However, there was no trace of Li Xianzi during this period of time. Princess Yongle never cared about the business. The perfume business had always been managed by Li Xianzi's residence. As the mistress of the Crown Prince's residence, she had received countless invitations during this period of time. Naturally, she had become unusually busy. If it was anyone else, it would be fine. However, they are all concubines after all. It's not good for them to not reply. She handed a small and exquisite wine pot to Li Xian, glanced at the black dot in the sky and turned her head back. "This matter is not urgent. Let's talk about it in a few days." Li Xian held the wine pot in his mouth and gulped down a few mouthfuls. He had learned this way of drinking from Li Yi. Of course, both of them couldn't hold their liquor well, so they could only drink the grape wine in this way. After a while he put down the wine pot, wiped his mouth and asked, "What date is it today?" The concubine thought about it and said, "April 8th. April 8th. It's been 2 months. Li Xian stared into the distance and mumbled in a low voice. "It's been 2 months. Where are they?" Inside the hall of diligent government, Emperor Jing put down a document and walked out with his hands behind his back. Only after breathing in the fresh air did he feel much better. "Your Majesty, they have been in Yuezhou for 5 days. They should be arriving at the Qing'an prefecture soon." Changde stood behind Emperor Jing and said in a low voice, "What a lazy young man. I am about to die from exhaustion in the capital." He, on the other hand, played around for 2 months. "If all the officials were like him, my Jing kingdom would have fallen a long time ago," Emperor Jing complained with a smile. Emperor Jing complained with a smile. There was a hint of envy in his tone as he said, "Sometimes I also envy him. Although I am the ruler of a country, I am far less carefree than him." How about this old servant summon him back? Changde asked tentatively. Emperor Jing waved his hand and smiled. Whatever. I'm not going to compare myself to him. Since the beginning of time there has never been an emperor who could live freely. However, now that he is gone, it has been a long time since someone could have a good meal with me. Changde nodded slightly. He didn't know why, but ever since His Majesty hid his identity and ate a meal with that young man at the Ning Palace, His Majesty, who never had much of an appetite, could eat a lot of food in front of him. His Majesty was right. That young man was a weirdo through and through. The ambassador from the Qi Kingdom hasn't left yet? Emperor Jing casually asked. Changde said, no. The third prince of the Qi Kingdom is staying at the Honglu Temple. He strolls around the capital every day and even visits brothels a few times. However, he hasn't done anything else. I heard that the third prince of the Qi Kingdom is good at both literature and martial arts. He is very outstanding among the princes of the Qi Kingdom. However, since he hasn't done anything, let him be. Emperor Jing said. When he was about to walk back into the hall with his hands behind his back, there was a sudden noise coming from the corridor on the side. Changde frowned slightly. Recently, the concubines in the palace had been addicted to the perfume. However, County Magistrate Li had told His Majesty to stay as far away from that thing as possible. Changde naturally wouldn't let those concubines get close to His Majesty. These days he had stopped many of them. Imperial father, Imperial father. This time it was obviously not a concubine. Princess Shaning pushed away 2 guards and trotted over to Emperor Jing. She said happily, Imperial father, why are you here? It took Shaning a long time to find you. Emperor Jing touched her head lovingly and said, what's wrong? Do you want to go out of the palace to play with your brother Xian again? Shaning blushed and said, Imperial father, I'm not as playful as you think. Besides, brother Xian isn't playing. He is making something that is very useful to the Jing Kingdom. Emperor Jing smiled and said, well, Imperial father is busy. Tell me, what are you looking for me for? Oh, I almost forgot. Princess Shaning heard this and immediately waved to the back. She said, bring it here quickly. Then she turned to look at Emperor Jing with a smile and said, Imperial father, I just made soup. If you're tired of reading the memorials, you can have a taste. Soup. When Emperor Jing heard this, he seemed to think of something terrible. His expression immediately changed and he hurriedly said, Shaning, Imperial father still has a few important memorials to read. You can go play first. Leave the soup there. Imperial father will drink it later. Looking at Emperor Jing striding into the hall, Princess Shaning looked a little disappointed. Then she seemed to think of something. She turned to look at Changde and said, the soup won't taste good when it's cold. Chief Steward Chang, you must be tired of serving Imperial father. Why don't you try it? Even as a first-class master in the world, he could face a martial arts master head-on. But in the face of Princess Shaning's soup, the face of the #1 master in the palace immediately changed. Wait, I'll go and get it for you. Princess Shaning ran to the palace maid who was holding the tray. When she turned back to talk to Changde, she found that the opposite side was empty. The door of the Hall of Diligent Government was closed and a cloud of dust was spreading in front of her eyes. Who is it? After a while, Princess Shaning realized what had happened. She pouted and said discontentedly, I practiced several times according to teacher's instructions. This classic sentence, when Prince Jean recalled his childhood, he still couldn't forget the fear of being dominated by mathematics. Viscount Mansion. Her and Rui have been gone for 2 months. Why aren't they back yet? The old lady of the Li family was sitting in the yard with a needle and thread in her hand. She was making a small dress. The blind old lady of the He family also looked a little envious and said, if only I had been blinded a little later, I would have been able to see what they look like. I would have been able to make clothes for their children like my old sister. The old lady of the Li family smiled and said, I'm also idle. While I can still see, I'll make a few more. I missed the child 20 years ago and I can't miss it this time. The old lady of the He family nodded and said, I have nothing to think about in my life. I just want to see Yunyang's child have a child as soon as possible. At that time, even if I die, I can close my eyes well. The 2 old ladies chatted while basking in the sun. Naturally, the topic was Li Yi and Rui or their children. A little farther away from the two old ladies, in a place with better sunlight, a kind-looking old man was lying on a rocking chair. His face showed a comfortable expression and he snorted slightly from time to time. In the accounting room, Uncle Lee was calculating the accounts one by one. Now he was able to maintain his composure in the face of the huge numbers. He thought to himself that at this rate, it wouldn't be long before the family would have to build another house to store the money. Outside the mansion, Fong was supervising the craftsmen to build houses. More than a dozen houses that were about to be completed were scattered on both sides of the Viscount mansion. He looked around and found that no craftsmen were slacking off. He casually sat on the stone steps at the door with a depressed expression on his face. More than a month ago, after he came to the capital from Qingyan Mansion with everyone, he learned that the son-in-law and the young lady had returned to Qingyan Mansion. For more than a month he had been doing these boring things every day and his heart was really depressed. Juzi secretly ate sweets and broke his teeth. All day long his cheeks were swollen and he cried for his parents. His wife at home now forbade him to eat candied haws again. Several women discussed and soon moved the candied haws business to the streets of the capital. Now every day was busy and only he was relatively idle. He began to miss the old days. Even if he ran up and down the mountain every day selling rui nectar and playing with the terrifying things with the son-in-law to kill the outlaws, it was still much more interesting than his current life. Of course, after coming to the capital he would never be able to see Miss Xiaohong again. Old Fong let out a long sigh and stared blankly at the azure sky. The pure white clouds gradually transformed into the appearance of a round-faced woman. Yuezhou was one of the provinces of the Jing Kingdom. It was famous for its dangerous mountains and rivers and it was next to Qingyan Mansion. At this time on the official road from Yuezhou to Qingyan Mansion, a carriage was slowly moving forward. The driver was a young woman. She was dressed in a tight outfit and leaned against the carriage. In her hands she was holding a strange picture book that she bought when she passed by a place. However, she did not flip through it for a long time. Her pretty face revealed a hint of laziness as she listened to the sounds coming from inside the carriage. The inside of the carriage was very spacious. It should be quite spacious for 4 or 5 people to sit inside. At this time, a young woman with 2 buns of hair was resting her cheeks in her hands as she listened to the mysterious stories of sword immortals flying on swords. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly rang out. In the middle of the road, a thick tree trunk blocked the road, sending up a cloud of dust. The woman's eyebrows slightly moved. She put down the picture book in her hands and looked forward. Not long after, a rustling sound came from the side of the dense forest. Immediately, a strong man wearing coarse hemp clothes jumped out from the side and blocked the front of the carriage. He fiercely said, "This mountain was planted by me. Bah! This mountain was planted by me. This tree, this tree." The expression on the burly man's face was a little awkward. This was the first time he had done something like this. He was illiterate, and he had to ask several people before he managed to ask about the official language of robbery. However, at this most important moment he was so nervous that he completely forgot about it. "This mountain was planted by me. This tree was planted by me. If you want to pass through, you have to pay for the road." The woman in the tight outfit jumped down from the carriage and glared at the man. She crossed her arms and reminded him. The man's face revealed a look of realization. He slapped his forehead and said loudly, "Yes, this mountain was planted by me. This tree is mine. It's me. What's mine again?" Chapter 401. I don't care. The man was obviously not very good at memorizing. After just 4 sentences he scratched his head hard but still couldn't remember. He shook his head angrily and looked at the woman saying, "As long as you hand over 10 taels of silver, I won't make things difficult for you. First time as a bandit?" The young woman glanced at the man and asked indifferently. "Yes." The man scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "Why are you doing this?" "To buy medicine for my brother's illness." "Just you?" "Just me." The burly man answered a few words and suddenly realized that something was wrong. It took him a while to realize that he was here to rob, not to be interrogated. He said angrily, "Stop talking nonsense and take out the silver, otherwise. He sat down on the tree in the middle of the road and said, "Or else you won't be able to get through here today." Whoosh! The burly man suddenly felt a cold light appear in front of him. In the next moment the tree trunk beneath him broke into two halves, causing his body to stagger and directly sit on the ground. When he reacted, a long sword was already on his neck. The woman looked down at him and said, "How can you be a bandit if you can't even speak properly?" The man looked wronged. It was also his first time in this business. It was already very good for him to be able to recite a few sentences from his first job. "You can speak properly when you have memorized it," the woman said coldly. "I opened this mountain, this tree is mine. This tree is planted by me, if you want to pass, stay. This mountain is opened by me, this tree is planted by me, want, why don't you leave? I don't want the silver." The man looked wronged and tears were about to flow down his face. Xiao Huan opened the curtain and looked at the man who was squatting on the ground with his hands on his head. She covered her mouth and laughed. "Young master, this bandit is so stupid." Li couldn't agree more. The bandit in front of him looked like a half-baked gangster. Not only had he not received any formal education, but he had also not read A Bandit's Self-Cultivation, Basic Etiquette for Highway Robbery, and How to Speak Fluent Mandarin. It seemed that there was something wrong with his head. However, Mississippi Lu was bullying him by making him hold his head and squat there to memorize. However, when she thought about it, it was normal. She could be vague about other things, but she absolutely had zero tolerance for fake mountain thieves who tried to bluff their way through. When the man was finally able to recite the most basic sentence, he finally looked like a bandit. Mississippi Lu then asked him to move the tree trunks on the road, and the carriage started moving again. Through the window at the back, Li saw that the man was still following closely behind. "I've already given you the money, why aren't you leaving?" Li opened the window a crack and said. As the man chased after the carriage, he said in a loud voice, "You're going to Qing'an Prefecture, right? I'll escort you there. I won't take the money. When I have money, I'll definitely return the money you gave me." Li was amused by this guy. What kind of bandit would want to return the money after taking it? This is the money you stole with your own ability. Why do you want to return it? The man was clearly confused by Li Yi's words. After thinking for a long time, he rubbed the back of his head and said, "It's not with my ability. I can't beat you. You're good people. I'll escort you to Qing'an Prefecture." "You already said you can't beat us. Why do we need you to escort us?" Li Yi realized that this man was a bit of a one-track mind. It felt weird to have someone like this following beside the carriage. "Even if I don't escort you, I still want to go to Qing'an Prefecture." The man gave a simple and honest smile and said, "Because my family is from Qing'an Prefecture." In today's society, even such a simple and honest man knew how to play tricks. The world's morals were deteriorating day by day, and people's hearts were not what they used to be. Li Yi lowered the window. He gave up when he was tired and continued to tell Xiao Huan about the legend of the Sword Immortals. Occasionally he would look out the window. When the official road became smoother and the carriage was less bumpy, it meant that they had entered the territory of Qing'an Prefecture. He had not expected that it would take them 2 whole months to go from the capital to Qing'an Prefecture. On this journey they had passed through countless prefectures and prefectures. They had thoroughly experienced what it was like to travel as a family. Other than the carriage, there was no other convenient means of transportation. Because they were going sightseeing, they naturally eliminated the possibility of taking a boat. They did not completely follow the waterway. They walked and stopped along the way, almost seeing all the scenery along the way. Of course, in these 2 months he had brought 3 first-class beauties through the streets. In these 2 months they had encountered a lot of trouble. Without going through it personally, it was impossible to know how chaotic the other deserted places, other than Qing'an Prefecture and the capital, were. In 2 months, they had encountered bandits and horse thieves no less than 10 times. Of course, there were not many of these bandits. At most, there were only a few dozen of them. Rui didn't even need to do anything. Rui could kill them all by herself with her sword. Even Xiao Huan, who was a little afraid at the beginning, could face the bandits with a smile after a few robberies and discuss with Li Yi what to eat for supper. This was also the reason why Li Yi did not bring a single guard when he traveled. With a wife and sister-in-law like this, where couldn't he go in this big world? Apart from this, the most serious incident was when they passed by a certain province. The son of the provincial governor's family molested a girl on the street and spoke rudely to second young Miss Lu. She crippled him with a single strike of her sword, and the 4 of them were surrounded by nearly 100 soldiers. That time, Li Yi didn't bother second young Miss Lu to do anything. For official matters he only needed a token to settle it. In the end the provincial governor even apologized and gave him a generous gift. This made Li Yi feel that the old emperor was actually quite generous. With a token in hand, the experience of having the world at his disposal wasn't bad. As the saying goes, the mountain in sight runs the horse to death. The saying was completely true. The short distance on the map could not be reached no matter how hard they tried. In the end they could only pick up the pace and finally officially set foot on the land of Qing and prefecture today. When he returned he would suggest to the old emperor that the person who drew this map should be hung up and beaten. The scale was seriously out of balance. If they relied on this kind of map to fight, they wouldn't need to worry about how brave the enemy would be. They would kill themselves. Benefactor, you must have traveled a long way, right? The burly man sat cross-legged outside the carriage and asked Li Yi with a silly smile. Seeing this fellow chase after the carriage for 2 hours and still not gasping for breath, Li Yi was very impressed by this fellow's physique. He nodded and said, "From the capital." "The capital? That's very, very far. I heard that the emperor lives in the capital. The houses in the palace are all built with gold." The burly man said with a face full of surprise. "I've never been to the capital. My big brother told me all this." Li Yi took Mississippi Lu's place and came out for some fresh air. Hearing the burly man's words, he thought to himself that the old emperor was not so extravagant. Along the way he saw many people rushing in the same direction on the official road. Puzzled he asked, "What's going on up ahead?" The burly man chuckled and said, "Benefactor, you probably don't know about this, but these people are all heading towards the Qin family ditch. There's a newly built brothel there. No, I think it's called a theater or something, but it's all the same. There's a big show inside. You can go in for 2 copper coins, but you can only stand and watch for 2 copper coins. I've only gone in once. Oh my god, that female ghost is so scary." At the mention of the theater, the burly man seemed to have turned on a chatterbox. He talked non-stop to Li Yi and said, "Speaking of this theater, it's amazing. It's opened all over Qing in prefecture. The shows inside are amazing. Female ghosts, white snakes. I've never seen them before. There's even an arena in the theater for those martial arts masters to fight in. There's some ranking list of martial arts masters. Watching them fight is even better than watching a big show. The only problem is that there are too many people around, so I can't squeeze in." The burly man talked non-stop as if he didn't know fatigue. However, when he was talking about these things he always had a faint smile on his face. Before he left, he completely handed over the matters of the theater to Old Man Sun and Wan Ruoqing. At that time he told them not to rush to expand and to wait until everything was stable before slowly developing. Unexpectedly, in just 2 months, the theater in their hands had grown to such a scale. Chapter 402. Ah, the bare-shouldered girl let out a long yawn and climbed out of bed. Through the window she saw that the sun had already risen to the middle of the sky. It was all because she had slept too late last night. Otherwise she wouldn't have gotten up at this time. She rolled around on the bed and saw the familiar figure still sitting in front of the table, frowning and writing something on a piece of paper from time to time. The girl jumped out of bed and exclaimed in surprise, "Sister Ruoqing, you didn't sleep last night again." The woman turned around and saw the girl sitting on the bed in an indecent posture. She pointed at the girl's undergarment that had slipped halfway down and turned back to write on a piece of paper. "There are some things that need to be taken care of, and the personnel arrangements for the newly built theaters haven't been decided yet. I've thought about it for one night and it'll be over soon." The girl on the bed didn't wear any shoes or socks. She walked over barefoot, wearing only an undergarment and undergarments. She lay on Xiaozhu's back and hooked her arms around her neck. "But you can't stay up all night. When Li left, he told me to take good care of you. No, I won't listen to you next time. I'll go to sleep first. I'll tie you up on the bed before midnight." Wan Ruoqing put down her pen and moved Xiaozhu's hands away. The 2 lumps of pressure on her back became even more obvious. She shook her head and said, "You're a big girl now. How can a big girl run on the ground with an undergarment on? Hurry up and put on some clothes. It won't be good if other people see. There are no outsiders here, what are you afraid of?" The girl reluctantly climbed down from Wan Ruoqing's back, walked to the head of the bed and began to slowly put on her clothes. At this time, another figure walked in from outside the door. The girl looked up and turned a deaf ear to it. She adjusted her doo-doo as if she didn't see it. Zheng Zimo glanced at the girl and no longer looked at her. She put a bowl of hot porridge in front of Wan Ruoqing and said, "Who can see you work so hard? Your body is about to collapse. Is it worth it?" Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, "It's not as serious as you make it out to be. It's just that there are a lot of things happening these days. I'll be fine once I get through it." "What are you cooking? Finish this bowl of porridge and go to sleep." Zheng Zimo put away the papers on the table and said after a pause, "I was in the theater just now and overheard some constables chatting. Constable Liu sent a letter from the capital." Arrestor Liu was, of course, Liu Yi. Under Li Yi's special instructions, he had helped the theater a lot, including Zheng Zimo's rise in fame, which attracted the covetous attention of several rich young masters. He was also the one who helped them deal with it. Although the two girls didn't have much communication with him, he was the person they were most familiar with in the county government. About 2 months ago, County Magistrate Liu of Anxi County was transferred to the capital. It was said that he was promoted. It was a sensational event in Qing'an Prefecture. Even they had heard about it. Arrestor Liu left with the county magistrate. Fortunately, the bailiffs in the county government had been taking good care of the theater. Not only did they deal with several groups of ruffians who caused trouble, but they also made the theater the focus of their patrols. However, Wan Ruoqing still did not understand what Arrestor Liu's letter from the capital city had to do with them. Arrestor Liu mentioned that person in the letter. "Do you want to hear it?" When speaking of that person, there was a touch of anger in Zheng Zimo's tone. As the biggest winner of the theater, he walked away and left all these chores to a weak woman. As the scale of the theater continued to expand, Zheng Zimo could see how hard it had been for Wan Ruoqing in the past few months. She had become a lot more haggard, so she was naturally full of resentment towards Li Yi. Of course, it could not be ruled out that there were other reasons for the resentment. Perhaps the resentment began to accumulate since he left without saying goodbye a few months ago, and it had only reached its peak now. Wan Ruoqing had been busy since last night and she was actually a little hungry. She sipped the porridge. Hearing Zheng Zimo's words, the expression on her face changed, but she didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. "He has been conferred the title of nobility. Now he is living a good life in the capital. I'm afraid he won't come back. What's the use of doing these things?" Even Zheng Zimo herself didn't realize that when she said this, her tone had become different from usual. Xiao Zhu put on her clothes, looked at the two people in the room, stuck out her tongue and quietly left. Wan Ruoqing put down the spoon and said after a while, "People have to do something. It's not this, it's that. Doing these things can make more people have food to eat. I also like it very much." Zheng Zimo asked angrily, "Do you believe these words yourself? What about you?" Wan Ruoqing raised her head and looked at her seriously. In the room, the atmosphere began to fall into a long silence. "It's none of my business." After a long time, Zheng Zimo said angrily, turned around and walked out. Wan Ruoqing smiled helplessly, walked to the bed and lay down. The moment she touched the pillow, sleepiness swept over her. The next scene is about to begin. Let them control the time. How is the script rehearsal of A Chinese Ghost Story going? Fu, go and keep an eye on them. Don't let them slack off. The list of martial arts masters can't be delayed. Several arenas need timely feedback. Got it. I'll ask Miss Wan about this later. Chapter 403. Naturally, Li Yi's feelings for Qing'an Prefecture could not be compared to those in the capital. Even though the capital was more prosperous than here, there was no Willow Village, no Rui Square, no brothel, no theater, and even the name of a brothel was not as pleasing to the ear as the Jade Courtyard. After 2 months of traveling, he had had enough fun, but it was also very tiring. Right now, Li Yi only wanted to quickly return home, lie on that familiar bed and have a good sleep. The carriage went straight through the city gate. Li Yi didn't know how many times he had walked this street. After 2 or 3 months, even the roadside vendors hadn't changed much. Li Yi even saw Deng Yo in a constable's uniform wandering on the road. The door of the Rui Square was tightly shut. The fat shopkeeper of the cloth shop next door moved a chair and sat in front of the shop. He continued to sigh about the poor business in the shop, Everything was the same as when he left. The honest man left halfway, so Li Yi had to drive himself. The carriage finally stopped in front of a large house. There were no adults at the door, but a few children were playing. Elder Fong had left the capital city a step earlier than them to pick up the people here. Now that 2 months had passed, they had probably arrived in the capital city a long time ago. However, this place did not seem to be uninhabited, and they did not know why. Seeing Li Yi and the others get out of the carriage, the children immediately stopped playing and hid behind the door. When they saw them coming inside, they immediately scattered and ran deeper into the courtyard. Just as the 4 of them stepped into the house, a figure came out to greet them. The girl named Yang Liuqing was slightly startled and then said with surprise, "Master, uncle, you're back." The room and courtyard were cleaned every day, even cleaner and tidier than when Li Yi left. According to Yang Liuqing, after Fong and the others left, the task of looking after the house was handed over to her and the children. These orphans no longer had to rely on begging for a living. The more honest ones were doing some simple work in the theater. The rest of them were not idle either. The older children led their younger brothers and sisters out to sell candied haws every day. The money they earned was enough to feed all of them, and there was still a surplus. Uncle, after you left, elder son of the theater and the steward of the mansion would send some silver every half a month. It's all here. Yang Liuqing had the boys carry out a few boxes from the room and explained. Li Yi was not surprised that Ning Wangfu would send money every once in a while. As for the other money, Li Yi remembered that when he left he had them use it to run the theater. The only person who had the power to decide the ownership of this money was Ruoqing. However, when he came, he heard the man say that elder son and the others had opened theaters all over Qing'an Prefecture. It seemed that the profits brought in by the theater were more than he had imagined. Under the premise of ensuring continued expansion, there was still so much surplus. He didn't need so much silver at the moment. If there were no accidents, the perfume business with Li Xian and Her Highness in the capital should be doing well. In the future, the silver would only flow into his home. No matter how much he had, it wouldn't be of much use. Originally, he thought that he would have to tidy up after coming back. He didn't expect to have such a diligent martial nephew. Li Yi could lie down and sleep when he returned to the room. In these 2 months, under the guidance of the deceptive map, it wasn't every day that he could coincidentally find an inn. Sometimes he could only sleep in the wild. Later, Li Yi simply made a few simple tents, but how could a tent be more comfortable than a bed? Even the blanket was just dried. He was too lazy to take off his clothes and shoes and directly lay down. After 2 months of bumpy and wandering, it was rare for him to have such a comfortable moment. After a while he fell into a deep sleep. When he opened his eyes again, the exhaustion accumulated over the past few days was swept away. He walked out of the room and found that the sky was already a little dark. Yang Liuqing was practicing swordsmanship alone in the courtyard. Although Mississippi Lu still hadn't officially acknowledged her as her disciple, she would occasionally give her a few pointers. Although the 2 of them weren't master and disciple in name, they were actually master and disciple in reality. Therefore, Li Yi had picked up a martial nephew for free. Although his martial uncle's ability was probably maybe, Li Yi admitted that he couldn't beat Yang Liuqing, but who asked him to have a powerful sister-in-law. As for Yang Liuqing, Li Yi still had some appreciation in his heart. It could even be said that he admired her. Among the people he knew, in terms of persistence and diligence, if she was the second, no one could be called the first. In the days when Mississippi Lu didn't agree to accept her as a disciple, she came here early in the morning to clean and left in the evening. She persisted for a long time. Whenever she was free, she could be seen practicing swordsmanship outside. Not only did her frequency far exceed Li Yi's, but even Mississippi Lu was not as good as her. Perhaps this was also one of the reasons why Mississippi Lu changed her original intention. Seeing Li Yi coming out of the room, Yang Liuqing hurriedly stopped and said, "Master and martial uncle have returned to Willow Village. They asked me to wait for you to wake up and tell you." Li Yi nodded, indicating that he understood. Willow Village was the place where Rui and the others grew up. Of course, they had to visit this time when they came back. Even Xiao Huan had mentioned it many times along the way. They might not have many opportunities to come back in the future. On the way here, they had agreed to go back to the village and stay for a few days. Willow Village carried too much weight for them. This was the childhood memory of the 3 sisters. Li Yi didn't want to join in the fun. He slept for a long time and was a little hungry. He planned to go out and find something to eat. He used to walk the road from the house to Rui Workshop, and now it was no exception. Rui Workshop wasn't open and Li didn't intend to cook by himself. He entered from the entrance of the wall market and walked to the door of a courtyard. He found that the door was actually not closed. Li gently pushed the door and went in. There was a faint light coming from inside the room. He was going to go in, but suddenly it seemed that he smelled something. He sniffed, and the next moment his face immediately showed an expression of surprise. He didn't choose to go straight but turned into a small room on the side. After entering, he found that it was the kitchen. At this time it was getting darker. Although it wasn't completely dark, it was still difficult to see clearly. Fortunately, what Li was looking for was not difficult to find. He followed the smell and opened a food box on the table. The long-lost familiar smell immediately became strong. Osmanthus cake. It was like the osmanthus cake made by Ruoqing. Li would never forget this taste. He was already a little hungry, so he couldn't wait to pinch a piece, then a second, a third, a fourth. At this time, all of Li's attention was on the food in front of him. He didn't realize that a delicate figure had quietly come behind him. Looking at the dark shadow in the kitchen, the girl showed a frightened expression on her face. She held the wooden stick in her hand tightly and quietly approached the dark shadow. "There's a thief." This was the first feeling in her heart. He came in without saying a word and hid in the kitchen sneakily. Who else could it be but a thief? As long as she shouted a few times, someone next door would hear it and rush over to catch the little thief and send him to the government. However, before that she had to teach this bold guy a good lesson. Finally, she walked to the dark shadow with his back facing her. The girl gritted her teeth, raised the wooden stick in her hand and swung it at the little thief. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.